Whispers in the kennel. The day silence spoke. They said the dogs were dangerous, too many, too scarred. They said the girl was broken, locked behind a fortress of silence. They never expected the two would forge a language the rest of us couldn't translate. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Town hall suits marched onto Henry Caldwell's property with clipboards and condemnation. As they rounded the barn, the ground seemed to tilt there. In the dirt lay Henry gasping for breath. 14 shepherds closed rank, not with snarls, but with precision. One applied pressure to his chest. One fetched medication. Another blocked the officials from intervening too soon. And then it happened. The mute child stepped into the circle, lifted her chin, and spoke. "They're helping." 2 words shattered. A year of silence and a lifetime of prejudice. What chain of miracles led to that moment? What vow bound a dying soldier, a grieving child, and a pack of discarded warriors into a single heartbeat? Press play and keep your ears open. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. The wind moved low across the barren fields, whispering through dry reeds and creaking branches like the voice of a past that refused to die. On the porch of a weathered farmhouse, just outside a forgotten corner of Idaho, an old man sat hunched on a wooden chair that groaned under the weight of time and grief. Henry Callahan, 70 years old, eyes gray like winter ash, stared out over the open land. In his gnarled hands, he held a worn leather leash frayed at the edges, metal clasp rusted from years of use and weather. It was all that remained of Grace. Grace had been a golden retriever, a rescue once abused, now long buried. Her grave sat beneath a sycamore tree behind the house, marked by a simple handmade sign, "Grace, my healer." It was not just a dog's resting place. It was where Henry's silence began. He hadn't always lived alone. Once there were fellow Marines, a wife, a son, noise. That was before the noise turned into screams, into sand, blood, metal. Before the PTSD stripped away the parts of him that still belonged to the world. Grace had been the only one who reached him after the war. She didn't speak, didn't ask, just sat beside him, night after night through every nightmare. And now, even she was gone. The days that followed her death had been unbearable. Henry stopped eating for 3 days, not out of sorrow, but because food had lost its meaning. The fields he once tended grew wild with thistle. The barn collected dust and silence. And the farmhouse became a shell of routines built to pass the hours between sunrise and regret. It was on the 4th night cold, sleepless and echoing, that he heard the distant yelping, faint, ragged, coming from the edge of the tree line. Henry didn't know what compelled him to move. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was Grace. He grabbed his coat, slid on his boots, and walked into the dark. The air smelled of pine and sorrow. He found the source behind a rusted gate where the forest met the abandoned road, a German shepherd, emaciated and bleeding, tangled in barbed wire. The dog didn't growl, didn't move, just stared up at Henry with a pair of eyes that looked too human, too tired. He didn't ask questions, just knelt down. "You want to come home, soldier?" he whispered. That night, Henry stayed up dressing wounds with hands that hadn't shaken like this since Kandahar. The shepherd, too weak to resist, simply lay beside the old man on the living room rug. For the first time in weeks, Henry spoke out loud. Not to the dog, but to the space Grace used to fill. "This one's broken too, Grace," he murmured. "Guess that makes 2 of us." He named the shepherd Rebel. But Rebel wasn't the last. Not by far. In the weeks that followed, it was as if Fatir, something gentler, had opened a door. Another dog came. Then 2. All of them ex-K9S, either retired or failed from police and military units. Some were dropped off anonymously. Others were on euthanasia lists, at shelters too full to care. Each one bore scarce physical, emotional, or both. And each one saw something in Henry's silence that made them stay. By spring, there were 5. By summer, 12. He didn't mean to become their savior, but in rebuilding their trust, he found something strange. The nightmares came less often. The weight in his chest didn't choke him so much in the mornings. He began fixing up the old barn, repurposing it into a makeshift kennel, bought tools, repaired fences, mowed the field. When the dogs played, He sat in a lawn chair and watched them with a look that hovered somewhere between awe and purpose. By the third year, there were 14 dogs on the property. All German Shepherds. All discarded protectors. Soldiers like him. Some trained in bomb detection. Some in tracking. One, Athena, had even served 2 tours in Iraq before being deemed too anxious to continue service. Henry never asked for their pasts. He only gave them a future. One cold evening, as he lit the porch lamp and watched the last of them come in for dinner, he realized something. The house was alive again. Not with people, but with presence. And not with noise, but with breath. He still didn't speak much. Didn't go into town unless necessary. He didn't need to. Out here, among these animals, there was a language deeper than words. They didn't flinch when he jolted awake from a nightmare. They didn't judge when he whispered Grace's name into his pillow. They just came closer. And stayed. But the outside world would not stay away forever. A few months later, a red sedan pulled up to the house next door. The property that had been empty for nearly 2 years. Henry, leaning on his porch rail, squinted past the oak trees. A woman stepped out. Then a girl small, delicate, her hands clutching a stuffed rabbit so tight its ear bent sideways. The girl looked around, wide-eyed, as if everything here felt too quiet. Then her gaze locked with his. Correction, not his. With Rebel, who stood beside him on the porch, the girl didn't smile, didn't wave, but she didn't look away either. That night, long after the stars had taken their place, Henry looked out the window one last time before bed. The girl was there again, standing by the fence line, fingers curled through the chain links, watching the dogs. Silent, unmoving, almost like a ghost trying to remember how to be real. And Henry felt something strange stir in his chest. Not fear, not sorrow, hope, just the faintest kind. Henry adopts Rex, the first German Shepherd, and begins a routine again. Training, feeding, talking out loud. Rex responds like a soldier taking commands, rekindling Henry's dormant discipline. The house, once still with grief, now echoes with clipped orders and paws on wood. The paperwork had barely dried when Henry opened the passenger door of his old Dodge truck and motioned for Rex to jump in. The dog obeyed without hesitation. No leash, no coaxing. Just a quiet nod from Henry, and Rex leapt up, landing heavy but precise on the torn leather seat. His eyes amber and unreadable scanned the dashboard as if memorizing coordinates. Henry stared at him for a moment, unsure if he was looking at a dog or something else. A shadow of a soldier. Another survivor. They drove home in silence. The only sound was the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional deep breath from Rex, who sat like a statue, tail curled, body still but alert. A readiness Henry hadn't seen in years. When they pulled into the gravel driveway, Rex didn't wait for instruction. He sat at attention, waiting. Henry walked around the truck, opened the door, and simply said, "Let's go." Rex stepped out, not with the skittish uncertainty of a dog entering unfamiliar territory, but like a soldier reporting for duty. His paws made no sound on the gravel. Only the wind moved around them. Henry's farmhouse had long stopped being a home. Since Grace died, the golden retriever, who had saved him more times than he could count everything inside, had become an echo chamber of grief. The wooden floors no longer creaked with purpose. The clock ticked for no one. The kitchen light hadn't been on past dusk in nearly a year. But something shifted the moment Rex stepped through the front door. His nails tapped rhythmically against the hardwood. He sniffed once, twice, then circled the entryway. No whimpering, no fear, just presence. Henry stood at the threshold for a second too long. Then, almost instinctively, he reached for the coat hook and took down the old leash that had belonged to Grace. It still smelled faintly of hersenlight, fur, damp earth. For a moment his hand trembled, but Rex had already sat at his feet, staring up, waiting. That night, Henry boiled 2 eggs like he used to for Grace and placed them in Rex's bowl along with a scoop of kibble. The dog didn't touch the food until Henry gave the command. Okay. 1 word, 1 trigger. And Rex obeyed with military precision. Henry found himself staring again. He hadn't used that tone-sharp, clipped, authoritative since he was discharged. He didn't even know he remembered it. But Rex responded as if they'd known each other for years, as if buried somewhere deep in both of them was the same rhythm. Orders, obedience, trust. It was Rex who pulled him back into routine. At 6 a.m., Henry rose not because he needed to, but because Rex was already at the door, waiting. At 6:30, they jogged the perimeter of the field. Henry hadn't run in months, maybe longer, but Rex paced him without breaking stride. At 7 o'clock, they trained. Sit, down, stay, heel, speak, M. Rex followed every command, like a soldier returning to active duty. And every time he obeyed, Henry felt something loosen in his chest. Not joy, he wasn't there yet, but structure, breath, a reason to lace up his boots. Within a week, the silence inside the house had changed. It wasn't absence anymore. It was presence. There were sounds again. The sharp cadence of Henry's voice barking commands. The rhythmic thud of Rex's paws on the porch. The metallic clink of a food bowl sliding into place. And late at night, the soft hum of Henry talking out loud to no one, to someone, to Rex. "Grace would have liked you," he said one evening as Rex curled up beside the fireplace. "You don't beg. You don't whine. You just show up." Rex lifted his head. Ears perked. Henry chuckled. It was a sound he hadn't made in so long. It startled even him. "This old house," he murmured, glancing around. "It's not as quiet now, is it?" There was a photo of Grace on the mantel. Henry reached for it, ran his thumb across the frame, then looked down at Rex. "She was my healer," he said softly. "But you're my discipline." The words hung in the air like confession. As the fire crackled and the moonlight bled through the curtains, Rex rose and padded over to Henry, pressing his head gently into the old man's knee. Henry didn't move at first. Then, slowly, like remembering how to breathe, he placed a hand on Rex's head. Not everything broken needs fixing. Some things just need company. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the barren trees. But inside that house, once frozen in grief, there was warmth again. Not joy, not yet, but warmth. Rex didn't replace Grace. He did something else. He brought the soldier in Henry back from the silence. He gave commands a purpose again. He made the forgotten house remember its own heartbeat. And Henry, for the first time in years, felt ready for whatever came next. The winters came and went, like weary veterans, limping across the field, unwelcome but familiar. Over the span of 3 years, the routine on the edge of the valley transformed from solitary ritual into something far greater. It started with 1 dog, but by the end of year 3, there were 14. 14 discarded lives. 14 names. 14 pairs of eyes that once braced for the blow before the bowl, and 1 old man with lungs riddled like paper and a heart too stubborn to give up. Henry Whitaker never planned to build a sanctuary, at least not in the way the words sounded: warm, well-funded, polished. His version was rough-hewn and quiet, but every nail driven into the old barn, every tarp pinned down to stop the wind, every salvaged heating lamp wired with trembling fingers, was a prayer whispered into the cracked silence of loss. Rex was the first. Then came Bravo, limping on 3 legs but still alert when Henry barked orders. Then Dagger, missing half an ear and trust in humans. Each one arrived under different circumstances, but their stories were cut from the same cloth. Retired too early, declared unfit, some scheduled for euthanasia within days. Henry's contacts came from whispers among other old handlers, sometimes from shelters who knew a guy who wouldn't let them die like this. They arrived with files stained in tears, ink, and excuses. Bit a handler, anxiety under gunfire, retired with no adopter. Henry didn't ask questions. He just opened the gate. The barn behind his weather-beaten farmhouse had once housed hay and rusted tools. Now, it was unrecognizable. A structured kennel, born from stubborn will and a few diagrams Henry found online, took its place. There were individual pens with straw bedding, overhead heaters patched together from salvage yards, feeding zones, isolated recovery stalls, and a medical shelf lined with supplies donated by a sympathetic vet down in Brattleboro. Each morning started with clipped orders. Bravo, heel. Eye, dagger, down. Echo, eyes front. The dogs responded like cadets under a drill sergeant's glare. Not out of fear, but from something deeper: recognition, purpose. And Henry, who once couldn't make it through a sentence without wheezing, found himself standing straighter. His boots fell in rhythm with 14 shadows moving beside him. Neighbors had started to whisper. At first, it was concern. Why is he collecting them dogs? Army mutts, aren't they dangerous? I heard one of them bit through a steel kennel. But concern soured into suspicion when the barking became the nightly soundtrack of the valley. A woman in her mid-40s who owned a B&B a mile down the road remarked at the feed store, "It sounds like boot camp every dawn. My guests think we're running a training base for Homeland Security." The joke caught on. That old man in his army, they said. Better not climb his fence. You'll end up in formation. Henry didn't care. He didn't need them to understand. Because inside those wooden walls, the chaos was sacred. It was structure, ritual, healing. Each of the 14 had a story he never spoke out loud, but he memorized the wounds like scripture. Nova, who flinched at shadows. Fang, who didn't eat unless Henry sat beside him. Scout, who waited by the door every day at exactly 5:17 p.m., the time his last handler used to come home. And then there was Ember. She arrived on a snow-thick morning, muzzle grayed from stress, more than age. She didn't bark, didn't eat for 2 days. But when Henry knelt by her crate that third night, she pressed her scarred head against his chest and exhaled a sound that was almost human. He named her for the quiet heat that remained when everything else had burned. Evenings in the barn were different now. Henry used to sit alone on a wooden chair just outside, sipping coffee as it cooled too fast in the mountain air. But now, he sat surrounded 14 war-torn bodies sprawled across blankets, crates, straw piles. One would rest his chin on Henry's boot. Another curled beside the heater, one ear twitching at every creak. And Henry would talk. Not to fill silence, but to share it. "You boys ever miss your partner?" he'd mutter, scratching Bravo's side. "I do. Still hear mine walking beside me sometimes, like ghost boots on concrete." Some nights, he'd recite drill chants softly, eyes closed. Other nights, he read aloud from tattered books or whispered stories no one else would hear. And always she ended with the same words. "You made it back. That's enough." But inside him, something darker brewed. He knew he was running out of time. The coughing fits had become more violent. The pills from the VA sat untouched some days. The weight loss, the fatigue, the tightness in his chest that didn't need a doctor to tell him. What kept him going wasn't denial. It was duty. Because each dog that came through his gate had been discarded by a system that promised loyalty. Just like him. And he refused to let them end alone. 14 and counting. On the 3rd anniversary of Rex's arrival, Henry stood before the barn at sunrise. His breath fogged in the crisp air. One by one, the dogs filed out and sat in formation, unprompted. No one had taught them this. No one had asked. But 14 battle-scarred soldiers lined up as the sun cut across the frost. And for a single breathless moment, it looked like an army reborn. Henry swallowed hard. Attenhut. 14 heads rose in unison. And in that stillness, Henry Whitaker, the man the town called broken, the man the war forgot, saluted them back. The wind whispered through the sycamore trees as if reluctant to disturb the stillness of the old farmhouse perched on the hill. From the outside, it looked like a postcard of rural peace-white picket fence, tire swings swaying lazily in the breeze, a line of marigolds gasping for sunlight by the steps. But inside, silence clung to the walls like dust. 8-year-old Mira Lorne had not spoken in 337 days. No one counted anymore, not aloud at least. But her grandfather, Arthur, kept a pencil-marked calendar in the drawer of his study-edge square, quietly crossed with a line that spoke volumes. Not today, maybe tomorrow. He didn't tell his wife, Lucille. Some hopes were too fragile to speak aloud. Mira lived in the attic now, not because they made her, but because she chose to. The slanted ceiling, the smell of old cedar trunks and forgotten quilts, the tiny circular window, this was her cocoon. A place where silence felt less like a punishment and more like a shield. She would sit for hours by that window, legs folded beneath her, small hands tucked into the sleeves of her oversized sweater. The view below was ordinary, fenced pasture land. Henry's run-down barn in the distance, the faint shimmer of a pond. Yet to her, it was the only place in the world that didn't ask her to be anything more than still. Mira hadn't always been like this. Before the crash, she was a firework bright, bursting and unable to sit still. Her laugh used to echo across the back porch like birdsong. But that was before the car spun out of control on the rain-slick highway. Before twisted metal. Before the cold white of hospital lights. Before the funeral where she didn't cry, didn't blink, didn't utter a single word, not even as they lowered both coffins side by side. Trauma-induced selective mutism, the specialist called it. Her voice wasn't broken, but it was hiding tucked away in some place only Mira could reach. And she had lost the map. Lucille did her best. She made blueberry pancakes every morning, even though Mira never touched them. She laid out dresses like she used to, combed Mira's tangled hair with hands that trembled. Arthur, a man built from tobacco fields and quiet grit, took her fishing twice a month and talked to her the entire time like she could still answer. Sometimes he'd squeeze her shoulder too tightly, as if begging the silence to shatter, but it never did. Instead, Mira stared out the window. She was staring again, now eyes fixed, unblinking at something new in the field below. A black blur moving with military precision, then another, and another. Dogs. 4. No 5 of them. German shepherds, large and lean, weaving in and out of formation beside an older man who barked commands like a drill sergeant. His voice, though distant, cut through the air like gravel on pavement. The dogs responded instantly, sitting, turning, sprinting, halting mid-stride like ghosts of a forgotten war. Mira tilted her head. For the first time in months, her brow furrowed in something resembling curiosity. The man was yelling again, names maybe? No, they were numbers. He didn't speak to them like pets. There were no coos, no baby talk, just code. Unit 4 down, Unit 7 eyes front. The shepherds moved like they remembered being part of something bigger. Like they missed it. Like they still belonged to something. Mira leaned closer to the window. Her breath fogged the glass. From that day forward, her schedule changed. She stopped playing with the dollhouse that gathered dust in the corner. Instead, she sat by the window in the morning, in the afternoon, and sometimes even at night, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. She watched them, the dogs, the man, the routine. Day after day, no variation. One day, she saw him feeding each dog waiting in a perfect line before being called forward. Another. She watched him crouch beside one whose leg trembled uncontrollably, whispering something Mira couldn't hear. He rubbed the dog's head, slow and steady. The next morning, that same dog sprinted across the field as if it had something to prove. And then there were the nights, the ones where Mira tiptoed to the window after everyone had gone to sleep. She watched under moonlight as the shepherds rested together in silence, forming a misshapen pile of fur and breath. Sometimes the old man sat with them, legs crossed, arms folded, silent too, just breathing with them, as if he belonged more with them than with any human still breathing. And maybe Mira understood that. Maybe that's why she began creeping outside. It started one night. She didn't plan it. Her legs just moved. One minute she was standing at the window, the next she was barefoot on dew-kissed grass, sweater sleeves trailing past her hands. She didn't cross the pasture line, didn't go too close, just stood behind the rusting iron gate and watched. The dogs noticed her, all of them. One by one, their heads lifted, their ears twitched, but none barked. They didn't move toward her either, just sat alert, waiting as if sensing something in her silence that they understood, something familiar. She stood there for 5 full minutes, then turned and slipped back inside without a word. The next night, she came again and again. By the end of the week, the dogs were used to her presence. One even wagged its tail when she appeared. Mira felt something stir in her chest, tiny and terrifying, like a heartbeat she forgot she still had. Lucille noticed her muddy feet one morning. Arthur found the back door unlocked, but neither questioned it. It was the first time Mira had moved without prompting in almost a year. They didn't know about the shepherds. Didn't know she had found someone who didn't ask questions or expect words. She was still silent, but something had shifted. Somewhere between the breath of midnight and the stillness of those amber eyes, Mira had spoken. Just not out loud. Not yet. The morning air in the valley was still, clinging to the dew like a child, afraid to let go. A pale sheet of fog rolled over the meadows, softening every edge of the world. From her window, Mira Lorne sat perched on her knees, chin tucked into her arms resting atop the windowsill. She hadn't spoken in 103 days, not since the crash. Not since the blur of sirens, shattered glass, and 2 wooden coffins lowered into earth that had never felt so cold. Now, her days were spent watching in silence. Not the kind of silence that felt restful. No, this was a silence that weighed on the bones. It pressed down with the quiet of things left unsaid, of memories that refused to settle. Until that morning. She saw him first, Henry Callahan, moving across the pasture like some kind of general from an old war film. He was clad in worn canvas, boots laced high, voice sharp and clipped like the crack of dry branches. At his side, a pack of German shepherds. 14 in total, all moving with uncanny synchronicity. He didn't speak in sentences. He gave orders. Sit. Thump. Stay. Stillness. Eyes on me. And every single dog, some gray-faced with age, others muscular and eager, obeyed like trained soldiers reporting for duty. It wasn't just obedience. It was reverence. Discipline born of trust. It was beautiful. Mira blinked. And for the first time in weeks, she leaned forward. Not because she was told, not because someone asked her to try, but because something inside her stirred. A flicker, a shift, a curiosity untouched by grief. Down in the field, Henry adjusted his stance and raised his hand in a tight motion. His palm flat, his fingers flicked to the right. Immediately, the line of dogs turned, forming a V formation, paws thudding against damp earth in perfect time. Mira, still breathless at the window, raised her small hand and mimicked the movement. Flat Pam. Fingers flicket right. The dogs couldn't see her. Henry didn't know she was watching. But she did it again, and this time her eyes didn't just flicker. They glowed. Something shifted in her posture. Her back straightened just a little. Her breath, shallow and cautious before, deepened. Her hand repeated the gesture, over and over, like a child discovering the first word of a forgotten language. From behind her, her grandmother Marlene entered quietly with a tray of toast and warm tea. She paused, surprised to see Mira standing. "Sweetheart." Mira didn't answer. Her hand dropped quickly, as if caught doing something wrong. But her eyes didn't move from the field. Marlene followed her gaze. She saw the man, the dogs, the commands. And she saw the look on Mira's face. It wasn't joy not yet, but it wasn't despair either. It was attention. It was the first spark. That afternoon, Mira returned to the window 3 times. Each time, she tried the hand signal again. Once with her left hand, once with both hands. When the dogs lined up and sat at Henry's command, she stood tall on her toes and mouthed the word, "Sit," silently, no sound, but the shape of her lips unmistakable. No one saw her. But that didn't matter, because something inside her was reaching, and reaching, for a child who'd pulled so far inward, was a beginning. Across the pasture, Henry had no idea what was unfolding behind that weathered window pane. He was too focused on the dogson correcting Coda's hesitations, on steadying Echo's gait, on reinforcing the sharp memory of aging Titus. But as he dismissed the pack and they trotted back toward the barn in lines of 2, he felt a weight in his chest shift, a pull toward something, a sense, perhaps, that the house across the road wasn't as silent as it once was. He paused, looked up, saw the curtain flutter, and smiled. Not much, but enough. Back in her room, Mira sat cross-legged on the floor, her stuffed rabbit propped against her knees. "Sit," she whispered, breath barely louder than wind. The rabbit, of course, did nothing, but Mira beamed. The silence hadn't shattered, but it had cracked. And that was enough for today. It was late afternoon when they convinced her to come outside. The sun spilled gold across the pasture, painting the wooden fences in amber light. Mira walked slowly between her grandparents, each step deliberate, cautious, as if the ground might give way beneath her. Her hand was in Marlene's, the other loosely clutched around the hem of her cardigan. She hadn't spoken yet, not in words, but she had moved. She had mimicked. She had watched. And now she had come outside. They didn't say much. Her grandfather, Ellis, simply pointed toward the fence by the lower field and said, "You might like the dogs. They're working today." Mira didn't respond, but her feet kept moving. The gravel crunched beneath their shoes, And as they approached the fence, the barking began to fade. The training was over. Only one dog remained outside. A German Shepherd. Dark sable, massive shoulders, head held high, but eyes different. Soft. Not the kind of soft that made you uneasy, the kind that made you feel seen. Rex. He stood just inside the fence line, nose tilted toward the wind, ears pivoting as the humans approached. Behind him, Henry stood with his hands in his pockets, body angled slightly away like a man bracing for impact he didn't know how to prevent. Ellis gave a nod in Henry's direction. "Afternoon," he said gruffly. Henry returned it with a quiet, "Sir." He looked at the girl beside them and felt the usual wave of discomfort swell in his throat. Kids weren't his strength. People, even less so. But dogs, he understood. Rex sat down by the fence, his tail thumping once against the dirt. Mira took a step closer. "His name's Rex," Henry said, voice low, as if afraid to break the air. "You can touch him if you like. He won't move unless you do." Mira's eyes shifted toward the dog. Her grandparents didn't push. They stayed back, a few feet behind, watching with a hope so fragile it might shatter under breath. Mira inched forward until her sneakers brushed the bottom rail of the fence. Rex didn't budge. He simply watched her and waited. There was no bark, no sudden movement, no wagging, just presence, just patience. And then her hand lifted. Slowly. So slowly it looked like the breeze might carry it away. Two trembling fingers reached between the wooden slats. She hesitated, and then touched the top of Rex's head. It was soft, warmer than she expected. His ears flicked once, but he didn't lean in, didn't pull away. He let her decide. Her hand hovered for a breath, then settled gently against his fur. And for the first time in 347 days, Mira Lorne did something she hadn't done since the accident. She chose to connect. Rex blinked once. His eyes never left hers. Not even when a tear slipped down her cheek and dropped into the grass below. Henry looked up. Watched it happen. Watched the silence break not with a shout or a sob it with touch. He felt something inside his chest tighten, like an old scar tugging against new skin. He didn't speak, didn't smile, but his shoulders dropped a little. The stiffness left his hands. "She's got a soft presence," he said under his breath, mostly to Rex. "You get it, don't you, boy?" Rex didn't respond, but he didn't have to. Behind them, Ellis cleared his throat. He turned his head away, pretending to study the fence post like it held some forgotten wisdom. Marlene wiped the edge of her glasses and bit back the kind of cry that only comes from watching someone return to the world one heartbeat at a time. "She hasn't touched anything," Marlene whispered. "Not her toys, not the swing, not even me." Ellis didn't answer. He just reached out and took her hand. Mira remained still, one hand on Rex's head, the other at her side. Her lips parted like she might say something, but no sound came. Didn't matter. The fence was still between them. But something had crossed it. Later that night, Henry would walk Rex back toward the barn, his boots heavy on the path. He wouldn't tell anyone what he saw. Wouldn't know how to explain it anyway. But he'd remember her eyes. The way they weren't afraid. Not anymore. And Rex? Rex would sit in front of the stall that night longer than usual. Nose pressed toward the breeze, as if waiting for something. Or someone. The moon hung low over the sleepy town of Elkhorn Ridge, casting a silver sheen across the rustling canopy of sugar maples that lined the back edge of Henry's property. It was nearing midnight, and the world had folded into silence except for the quiet shuffle of small shoes over dew-wet grass. Mira moved like a ghost, her breath light, her bare arms clutching the sleeves of her hoodie. She'd waited until her grandparents were asleep, until the only sound in the house was the old grandfather clock echoing time that meant little to a girl who hadn't spoken in nearly a year. She made her way behind the barn, toward the fenced enclosure where 14 retired German shepherds lay in rows of makeshift kennels. During the day, they were alive with training and discipline. At night, they became something else, guardians of silence, protectors of memory. Mira slipped under the lowest plank of the outer fence, her tiny fingers pressing into the cold earth as she crawled forward on instinct. She sat on a flat patch of grass, just a few feet from the nearest pin, her knees drawn up, chin resting on them. For a long moment, she didn't move. She just existed. And for once, she didn't feel alone in it. The dogs didn't bark. They didn't growl or stir in agitation. One by one, they lifted their heads. Rex was the first. His ears perked, head tilting, then Bramble, then Kane. They didn't rush her, didn't come near the fence as they would for a stranger. They simply watched, in silence, as if sensing that this child, barely 8 and stitched with wounds no one could see, didn't need noise. She needed presence. Mira unzipped her hoodie pocket and pulled out half of a peanut butter sandwich she'd hidden during dinner. She held it in her palm, hesitated, then stretched her arm toward the fence. Rex rose from his straw bedding and padded forward, slow and soundless. His paws pressed into the grass like shadows. He stopped just shy of the fence, studying her, as if waiting for her to give permission. Mira didn't speak. She hadn't spoken in months, but her hand trembled forward just an inch. That was enough. Rex leaned in, his dark eyes never leaving hers, and gently took the sandwich from her fingers. No snap of teeth, no tug, just a soft lift, followed by a swallow and a single wag of his tail. Then he lay down near the fence, his head resting between his paws, eyes still locked with hers. Something cracked inside her chest. It wasn't sound. Not yet. But it was something. A fracture in the wall she'd built, ever since the crash. The one that took her parents, that left her in a hospital bed with wires and whispers, with therapists who spoke kindly and uselessly. That wall had grown thick with silence. But here, under the stars, with a dog whose breath she could hear in the dark, something warm leaked through. The night passed in heartbeats. Mira didn't sleep. She just sat. Rex didn't move. Behind him, the others remained unusually still, like soldiers keeping watch. There was no need for words in that space. Only presence, only breath and heartbeat and moonlight. When the wind picked up and the maples rustled like a hush over the land, Mira closed her eyes. She leaned her head slightly to the side, resting it against the fence, her cheek brushing the cool metal. On the other side, Rex did the same. Nose to the bars, cheek to wire, connection, silent, whole. She didn't know why she had come here, only that something inside her had pulled her out of bed and across the yard. A whisper without voice, a call without sound. But now that she was here, she knew she would come again. In the farmhouse, Henry stirred. He'd been a light sleeper since the war, even more so in the years since retirement. Something had tugged at him tonight, maybe the shift of air, or maybe something else. À quelle disturbance? He pulled a jacket over his shoulders and stepped onto the back porch. From a distance he saw her, tiny frame, still posture, facing the fence, and beside her, the unmistakable silhouette of Rex. He didn't call out. He didn't move closer. He simply watched. There was a reverence in the moment, something sacred. A child who hadn't spoken in almost a year. A dog no longer in service, yet somehow reporting for duty again. And between them, no need for healing methods or structured therapy. Just stillness, just breath. Henry's throat tightened. Not from worry, from knowing. That girl wasn't just a quiet neighbor. She wasn't just another broken thing the world had forgotten. She was like him. And Rex had always known how to find the ones worth saving. The sun had barely crept over the horizon when Mira pressed her notebook flat against the wooden picnic table. The spiraled edge was rusted from dew, and the pages curled from her countless flips. She tapped her pencil softly against the first page, a hand-drawn sketch of Rex's face stoic, with that slight scar near his brow. Underneath, a shaky caption, "Captain." Mira didn't speak, not with her lips, but her hands moved constantly, now sketching, signaling, recording. Her world had shifted from silence to motion. She had watched Henry for week show. He stood like a statue before the pack, shoulders squared, voice sharp but calm, never raising it unnecessarily. The dogs listened, not out of fear, but reverence. Mira had learned early that what Henry used wasn't volumate, was precision. And even without speaking, she could imitate that. So she made her own language. She filled the notebook with symbols. A flat palm down meant sit. 2 fingers pointed ahead meant go. A slow fist across the chest meant guard. She assigned 1 signal per page, detailing the response she saw in each dog. Some picked up quicker than others, especially the older ones. Rex, naturally, responded as if he'd always known. In the early mornings before her grandparents rose, Mira slipped outside, careful not to let the screen door creak. She'd tiptoe barefoot through the field where Henry's property kissed the edge of her grandparents'. The fence was no longer a barriere, it was a boundary of trust, and Henry, by now, had stopped pretending not to notice her visits. At first, Mira practiced from a distance. She would kneel in the grass, hold her hand up in a silent command, and watch. Rex would tilt his head, sniff the wind, and obey. Sometimes the others followed, sometimes not. But she didn't mind. She wasn't commanding them, she was inviting them into something sacred. By week 3, the dogs began to approach when they saw her. Not barking, not leaping, just coming, silent and waiting. One morning, she stood completely still, palm open in the air. Rex halted 10 feet away. Mira lowered her hand. He sat. Her chest fluttered. She scribbled in the notebook with urgency, her mouth pressed tight to stifle the grin rising from her ribs. She flipped pages, tested another, raised her 2 fingers forward. Rex stood, waited, walked. It wasn't just working. It was connecting. By now, Henry had taken notice. From his kitchen window, he stood sipping black coffee, the mug warm against the arthritic curve of his fingers. He watched the girl with the quiet soul who once trembled behind her grandmother's skirt, now orchestrating a silent ballet of German shepherds across the open field. And not with treats, not with shouts, not with force, just presence, precision, patience. He didn't interrupt. That afternoon, Mira spent 2 hours tucked beneath the willow tree near the barn. Her knees were stained green, her palms smudged with pencil dust. She wasn't just drawing now, she was cataloging. Her own command journal had grown beyond pictures. It was a field guide. Each dog had a page. Asterisk Juno. Easily distracted but responds to hand over heart signal for stay. Asterisk Maximus. Afraid of sudden motions. Needs a slow, gentle cue. Asterisk. Ghost. Prefers distance, but watches Mira constantly. She added stickers to the corner of each page stars for progress. She never spoke them aloud, but in her mind, she gave each one a medal. Retired soldiers, some broken, some bruised, but none forgotten. And in this army of silence, she was their captain. That night, Henry found something strange beside the barn door. A folded piece of paper weighted with a smooth stone. On the front, a clumsy sketch of Rex, drawn in Mira's unmistakable style. Underneath, a page of hand signals, labeled like military code. Henry bent slowly, knees aching from years of wear, and picked it up. As he unfolded the paper, a softness crept into his face that few had seen in years. Not since deployment. Not since he held his own daughter in arms that still trembled from war. The final line at the bottom wasn't a command. It was a whisper only the heart could hear. I can talk to them. No signature. No name. But it didn't need one. The next morning, Henry waited outside the barn before dawn. Mira appeared, notebook in hand, hair tangled by sleep, eyes wide. She froze when she saw him. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he crouched beside Rex, tapped his knee gently. Rex trotted to Mira, sat beside her like a sentry. Henry pointed to her notebook. May I? Mira hesitated, then nodded. He turned a few pages, absorbing the child's careful handwriting, the instinct in her illustrations. She had noticed things, even he hadn't. Emotional shifts, behavioral triggers, the way one dog twitched when sirens echoed in the distance, the way another froze when someone raised a hand too fast. Henry closed the book gently, looked at her. You're doing good work, he said. Mira blinked. He added, quieter this time, better than most adults I've trained. She didn't respond, but her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, and Henry knew that gesture was her way of saying thank you. From then on, the mornings changed. Henry didn't just allow her presence. He adjusted his drills to accommodate her silent commands. When he barked, down, Mira lifted her palm. When he whistled, she pointed 2 fingers. The pack moved as one audible and inaudible orders blending into a perfect choreography. Neighbors began to glance out their windows more often. The girl who didn't speak was now commanding war dogs with a flick of her wrist, and they listened. In the still silence of her bedroom that night, Mira lay curled under her blanket, notebook on her chest. Her lips mouthed a word she hadn't dared in almost a year. Not aloud. Not yet. But close. Good. Just that one. A small word. A spark in the dark. And beneath the stars, 14 retired warriors stood guard across the field, waiting for their quiet leader to return. The moon had become their witness. A full week had passed since Mira first stepped into the moonlit clearing behind Henry's barn, her bare feet brushing dew-soaked grass, her breath soft as the hush between violin notes. She no longer crept like a shadow. She walked upright, now still, wordless, still unseen by the sleeping house, but with a kind of silent authority. There was purpose in each step. The dogs sensed it too. At first, they would rise cautiously at her approach, ears twitching, eyes half-lidded but watching. Now they awaited her, tails flicked low with recognition. Luna was always the first to move, elegant, sleek, always circling Mira in a slow arc, as if scanning the edges of her sadness. Rex sat regally at the edge of the clearing like a statue, watching the others, but following Mira's movements with alert eyes. Atlas, the largest and most scarred of the group, would rise only when Mira did. She had never spoken a word, but every night, she brought her notebook, the one with pages bent at the corners, covered in diagrams and scribbled arrows, a map of intention. Each signal was hers. Palm open for stay, 2 fingers forward for go, a closed fist for guard. She had learned not through mimicry but through some deep intuitive resonance. Henry's old training sessions, glimpsed from behind the fence, had etched themselves in her memory. Tonight, she faced 5 dogs. 5. They sat in a semicircle before her. Luna, Rex, Atlas, Ghost, and Bear. All of them once broken. All of them watching. She held her notebook up for a moment like a soldier with orders. Then she tucked it into her coat and stepped into the moonlight. With a single hand signal palm down, steady, she asked for silence. Not that they needed it. The stillness was profound, heavy. Even the wind obeyed. Her right hand moved fluidly. A curve of fingers. A flick of the wrist. Luna darted forward, retrieved the knotted rope from the stump, and brought it to Mira, dropping it at her feet with gentle pride. Mira's lip curled barely, a half-second thing. Not quite a smile. But her fingers brushed Luna's head like a blessing. Another signal 2 taps against her thigh. Rex rose, ears forward, and began a slow perimeter around them, the silent echo of a patrol route. Atlas followed her from behind, like a second shadow. Bear, who still flinched at sudden movement, stayed near the tree line but didn't retreat. Even Ghost, who had arrived with eyes clouded in grief and a mangled ear, sat taller under the stars. They were becoming a unit. Not in the way Henry had trained crisp commands and firm posture, but in a deeper, more fragile rhythm. Mira did not need control. What she offered was understanding. And the dogs responded not out of duty but trust. A trust that had never been demanded, only given. She moved through the clearing now with her arms at her sides and the dogs in perfect motion around her. 1 to guard, 1 to follow, 1 to retrieve, 2 at rest but alert. It was a choreography born not in obedience but in pain transformed. From the porch, Henry sometimes watched. He'd woken once to the faint click of paws on gravel and followed the sound with an old rifle at his side only to find Mira there, illuminated by moonlight and surrounded by his rescues. He hadn't stepped forward, just stood in the dark with his jaw clenched, eyes stinging. The girl who hadn't spoken in nearly a year had found language, just not the kind people listen for. Tonight, Mira sat on the stump, and the dogs closed in around her. She pulled out a half sandwich wrapped in wax paper and split it evenly into 4. The dogs waited. No lunging, no snapping. 1 piece to Luna, 1 to Rex, 1 to Atlas. The last she held in her palm, extended toward Bear, who took it with a tongue-soft graze of teeth. Ghost did not eat, but he sat nearer than before. Then Mira did something she'd never done. She lay back against the stump, arms resting on the grass, eyes tilted skyward. Her fingers brushed the earth like she was listening through touch. Luna curled beside her. Rex lay at her feet. Atlas and the others formed a silent crescent around her body, not closing in, but forming something ancient protective, a sacred perimeter. It was a picture no one took. No flash would have captured what hovered in the air that shared loneliness turned into pact. That unspoken agreement. We are broken, but not useless. Not to each other. Above them, the stars blinked like silent Morse code. Mira lifted her hand, slow and careful, and placed it on Luna's back. Her fingers didn't tremble. The letter came folded in thirds, slipped between the pages of Henry's morning paper like an unwelcome whisper. Its Sela-printed emblem of the Maple Glen Homeowners Associations stared back at him like a threat wrapped in politeness. He didn't open it right away. Just let it sit on the porch railing while the sun finished rising over the barn roof. The kettle inside whistled once, then again. The dogs were already pacing the yard, their tails wagging in unison, waiting for the gate to creak open. Rex sat nearest, his muzzle now silvering with age, but his eyes as alert as ever. He tilted his head at Henry like he knew something had shifted. Only after breakfast was made, and Fedone bowl at a time, 14 sets of eyes waiting their turn did Henry finally unfold the paper. The words felt like a bruise forming under the skin. Formal complaint. Public safety concern. The lines below it were worse. Several neighbors have expressed concern regarding the number of large dogs housed at 114 Maple Bend Lane, citing safety risks, excessive barking, and the perception of aggression toward nearby children. While we recognize the commendable nature of animal rescue, Maple Glen maintains strict community guidelines. HOA policy limits household pets to a maximum of 3. Effective immediately, you are hereby notified. Henry stopped reading. He didn't need the rest. His hands trembled not with fear, but with a weariness that lived deep in the bones of people who had already buried too many battles. The paper slid from his fingers. It fluttered to the floor, landing beside an old chew toy Mira had left during one of her silent, moonlit visits. She'd started bringing them one by one, each inscribed with a hand-drawn name. Not toy, but gift, the word written in her looping, careful script on the tag. Out back, Luna barked once, sharp and direct, then silence again. They were trained to quiet, trained not to threaten, not to chase. Henry had taught them the discipline himself, and now a mute child had built on it, in secret, under stars. But all of that meant nothing to neighbors who only saw teeth and size and shadow. At the HOA office, the air smelled like paper and printer toner and cold coffee. Henry stood across the desk from Carla Wren, the president of the association, a woman with tight curls, tighter lips, and a folder marked "Animal Issue" in all caps. "We received this complaint last week," she said, tapping a manicured finger on the paper. "New family just moved in across from you. They've got toddlers. Naturally, they're concerned." Henry didn't speak right away. He just stared at the lines on the folder as if they'd rearranged themselves into something he could live with. "They're not aggressive," he finally said. "I don't doubt your intentions," Carla replied, softening her voice the way people do when they think you're broken in places they can't see. "But perception is powerful. We have rules for a reason." "They're not pets," he said. "They're rescues. Veterans. Some of them can barely walk." Her lips tightened again. "I know it's meaningful work, but we can't make exceptions based on feelings." Feelings. That word, so small, so clinical, like it could reduce years of rehabilitation. Wounds reopened by thunder, nights spent lying beside dogs who whimpered in their sleep back to a mere hobby. Henry wanted to speak, but his mouth went dry. He wasn't built for words anymore. Outside, the sun caught the hood of his truck like a memory, and Henry climbed in without looking back. That night, the barn was quiet. Mira didn't come. Henry sat on a stool near Rex's sleeping mat, the old shepherd resting his chin on the floor beside his boots. The paper from the HOA lay on the workbench, next to a worn photograph of his old unit dog handlers in dusty camo, one hand on their partners, all frozen in a time before any of this had a name. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered to Rex. "What it's like to be unwanted after they've used you up." Rex's ears flicked at the sound, a slow blink his only reply. Outside, the wind moved through the maples like breath over old scars. Henry folded the paper once more, but this time, not to throw it away. He tucked it into a drawer with the obedience charts Mira had made. Each dog had a page. Atlas, Patrol, Luna, Retrieval, Rex, Command, Acknowledgement. No one else knew, not even her grandparents, just Henry and the dogs. He looked toward the rafters where a string of low bulbs hung from nails. Each one marked a new dog that had made it through the worst. 14 now. 14 souls that the world said were too broken. And maybe it was foolish, but Henry believed in one thing more than policy. Second chances are earned in silence, not votes. The next morning, Mira showed up early. Not at night, not through the trees, but in plain daylight, holding a sketchbook tight to her chest. Her grandparents followed slowly behind, watching her like she might disappear. She didn't speak, of course, but she knelt beside the fence and tapped it softly. Luna appeared first, then Rex, then Atlas. All of them calm, sitting, tails thudding low against the earth. Mira held up the sketchbook to Henry. It read, "They listen, not because they're dogs, because they trust." Henry swallowed the lump in his throat. The air around them stilled, and in that moment he knew this wasn't just about dogs. It was about people like Mira, like him. People who stopped speaking not because they had nothing to say, but because no one ever listened right. The knock at the door came just after breakfast, 3 crisp taps that broke the morning hush like a snapped branch in a forest. Henry stood in the middle of the hallway, his coffee halfway to his lips. His dogs, always alert, didn't bark. They stilled. Rex rose to his feet and let out a low, questioning whine, as if already sensing that this knock didn't belong to a neighbor or a delivery. Henry opened the door slowly. A woman stood there, mid-40s, tailored beige trench, hair pulled tight at the nape, clipboard in one hand and an ID badge clipped to her belt. Her eyes flickered past Henry, even as she introduced herself. "Mr. Henry Wakefield? I'm Karen Dunley, from Child Protective Services." He nodded, wary but polite. "Can I help you?" She adjusted the clipboard. "I'm following up on a community welfare report. It concerns an 8-year-old girl named Mira Lorne, currently residing with her grandparents at 77 Maple Row." Henry's chest tightened. "Yes, they live just down the road. The report indicates Mira's been seen unsupervised on your property," she continued, eyes hard now. "Specifically around your dogs." Henry hesitated. "She's not unsupervised. I see her. She's 8, Mr. Wakefield." "And these are working dogs?" She gestured toward the yard behind him, where at least 6 German shepherds and 1 sleek black Malinois were lounging under the oak trees. They watched silently, like sentries. Henry didn't answer right away. He looked past her, toward the familiar path Mira had worn through the fence, lined the faint track she took, almost daily. The social worker followed his gaze. Just at that moment, Mira appeared near the edge of the property, walking in slow, careful steps, her arms wrapped around a brush and a folded towel. Luna padded beside her, tail swaying low, close like a shadow. Karen's lips tightened. Henry stepped halfway out the door. "Mira, wait!" The girl froze. Luna, sensing the shift in energy, stopped too, ears twitching back. Karen's frown deepened. "Is she grooming one of them?" "She likes to help," Henry said carefully. "It's quiet time for her." Do her guardians know she's here?" "Yes," he replied. Though the truth was soft to her, grandparents tolerated the walks, but had stopped trying to keep her inside months ago. Mira was a whisper that moved with the wind-no tantrums. No demands, just silence, and a heartbreaking insistence on routine. Karen turned her attention back to him. "Regardless of intention, this setup is not safe for a child, especially one with trauma." Henry bristled, just slightly. "Those dogs wouldn't hurt her. She's the only one they trust outside of me." "And if that changes?" she shot back. "If one day a trigger happens you didn't expect?" He clenched his jaw, choosing his words. "I watch her." Karen scribbled on the clipboard. "This isn't personal, Mr. Wakefield. I understand you've got a service record, and this facility's helped a few rescues. But Mira's condition or mutism, her emotional fragility, it complicates things. Being with the dogs helps her. That's not for you to decide," she said gently, almost kindly. "It's for trained therapists, certified environments." Henry stood silent as she took a step back toward her government-issued SUV. "I'll be speaking with her grandparents shortly," she added. "This is a courtesy visit, but it may escalate. Please understand, our goal is Mira's safety." The door closed slowly behind her. That evening, The Lorne house was tense. The clink of cutlery at dinner sounded louder than it should have in the quiet room. Mira pushed peas around her plate with the tip of her fork. Her grandfather, Ellis, cleared his throat, already uncomfortable. "Sweetheart, that lady from the agency, she thinks it's best you don't go near the dogs for a little while." Mira's fork stopped. Her grandmother, Beth, tried to cushion the blow. "It's not forever, baby. Just until they sort things out. They just want to make sure you're okay." Aye. New response. New nod. New protest. Just that same unbearable silence. Ellis leaned back, sighing into his napkin. "You can still draw, or sit on the porch swing, right? Just stay on this side of the fence for now." Mira's hand moved, trembling slightly, and rested in her lap. She didn't look up. The little towel she always carried in white, now soft from use, was crumpled under the table. Later that night, in her bedroom tucked under the sloped roof, Mira opened her sketchbook. Her drawings had become more detailed, lately less abstract. She no longer scribbled storms or broken trees. Now, her pages bore neat outlines of dogs in motion. She had a labeled spread for each of them. Luna's tail signals, Rex's ear twitches, Atlas's posture shifts. Each dog had its page. Her notebook wasn't just art anymore, it's a language. One only she spoke. And now, no one wanted her to speak it. She closed the sketchbook and curled into herself, facing the window. Outside, the moonlight poured across Henry's field, silver on grass. The dogs weren't moving, but she knew they were there, waiting. Mira pressed her palm gently against the glass. At the kennel house, Henry sat on the back step, shoulders hunched, cigarette unlit between his fingers. The dogs were unusually restless, pacing. Rex kept glancing at the fence. Luna whined once soft and low. Henry didn't say a word, but in the quiet, the absence of Mira was louder than any bark. He reached for the sketch she'd given him 2 nights ago, a rough pencil drawing of Luna bowing low, while Mira held her hand up, the universal signal for stay. Underneath it, in tiny block letters, was the word quiet. Henry swallowed hard. They'd taken many things from that girl. And now, they were coming for the one place she'd finally spoken without saying a word. The coughing started as a whisper, just a dry tickle in Henry's throat that he swatted away like a gnat. But now, it came with a vengeance, ripping through him in sharp, guttural bursts that left his chest aching and his vision swimming. That morning, during drills, he had doubled over by the 3rd whistle. The dogs paused at every single one of them, from Luna to old Dieselus, if they sensed something unnatural. Mira stood at the edge of the field, notebook pressed to her chest, her brows drawn together in silence. Henry waved off their stares. "Just a cold," he muttered hoarsely, straightening with effort. But the red blooming into his handkerchief told another story. Janet found him sitting on the porch steps that afternoon, a mug of lukewarm coffee trembling in his grip. The dogs lay sprawled around him like sentries. Rex at his side, Luna's head resting on his boot. Mira sat beneath the hydrangea bush, scribbling silently into her command book, her hand occasionally reaching out to brush Atlas's ear. "You look like hell," Janet said, not unkindly, as she handed him a brown paper bag from the pharmacy. "Thanks," Henry rasped. "Always good to hear it from a friend. You've had that cough for months." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Her voice hardened. "You coughed up blood in front of a kid this morning. I saw." He didn't answer, just stared out toward the fading sky, where clouds hung low over the hills like tired shoulders. "I made an appointment for you," Janet added after a long silence. "Dr. Lynn, Thursday at 9. Don't argue. I'll drive." The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and worn leather chairs. Henry sat hunched in his hoodie, thumbing through a dog-eared copy of Field and Stream, while Janet filled out paperwork under his name. The tests didn't take long. Blood work, X-rays, a CT scan. What took long, what felt endless, was the silence in the exam room afterward. A small wall clock ticked like a slow metronome, each second pounding into Henry's chest. He stared at a faded anatomy chart of lungs on the wall and thought bitterly how he could name every canine bone structure from memory, but now couldn't stop the thought of his own lungs decaying from the inside out. Dr. Lynn entered with a soft knock, and that look, Henry had seen it before. On combat medics, on coroners, on people who carried the weight of delivering bad news for a living. Stage 3, non-small cell lung carcinoma. Cardiac stress indicating a 60% probability of complications under physical exertion. Treatment options were limited, especially considering the late stage and his refusal to leave the dogs behind for weeks of chemo. Months? Henry asked quietly. Dr. Lin hesitated. If you rest, if you limit stress. Henry let out a dry, bitter laugh that turned into a wheeze. Rest? Limit stress? He had 14 old dogs, most of them unadoptable. He had Mara, a silent girl, who had barely begun to flicker back to life. He had neighbors who wanted them gone. A CPS file in motion. And now, this. Death, he realized, wasn't what scared him. It was what he'd leave behind. He didn't tell Janet, and he sure as hell didn't tell the Morrisons or Mira. That night, he sat alone in the garage, filing through every contact he had in the Dog World rescue groups. Old handlers, veterans with open land. Most responded with sympathy. We love what you're doing, Henry, but the list of excuses stung in their familiarity. Too many dogs. Too old. Too much liability. Too aggressive. He kept a notepad beside the phone and began writing names. Next to each, he drew a single line through them, one by one. 3 nights later, the pain hit like a sucker punch. He was standing by the kennels, giving Atlas a late-night water refill, when his knees buckled. The metal bowl clanged to the ground. Rex lunged against his gate, barking not a warning bark, but a worried one. Henry leaned against the wall, clutching his chest. A sharp, burning pressure bloomed down his left arm. He tasted copper in his mouth. He thought, not now. Not here. Please. A small shape darted from the shadows, Mira. She had seen everything from her window, it seemed. Her bare feet made no sound on the dirt as she ran to him, dropped to her knees, and pressed her small hand gently on his shoulder. He forced a smile. It's all right, sweetheart. Just dizzy. I'm okay. But her eyes didn't believe him. They stared into his with the quiet gravity of someone who had seen too much grief, too young. And then, to his surprise-ish, he helped him stand. Silent. Steady. She brought a flashlight, guided him to his chair, and dragged over a blanket. Luna padded over and lay across his feet. Rex refused to go back inside. That night, as Henry drifted into a fevered sleep on the porch, surrounded by fur and moonlight and silence, he realized something strange. He wasn't alone. The next morning, the cough was worse. Blood on the pillow. A faint tremor in his hands. But he showed up for drills anyway. He whistled weakly. The dogs formed ranks except Mira was already there, ahead of him, notebook in hand, signaling quietly. 5 dogs responded. Perfectly. He said nothing, only watched. His lungs burned, but something in his chest pulsed not pain, not dread, pride, a seed of something living. Later that day, while the world resumed its slow spin, and the mailbox filled with bills and warnings and official letters with "Notice" printed in red ink, Henry sat in the garage, staring at the photograph tacked above his workbench. It was faded. Corners Kurlinga younger him, in uniform, surrounded by a pair of grinning Belgian Malinois in tactical vests. They had trusted him with their lives, just like these 14. He pulled out an envelope, handwrote a single sentence. If I go, they stay together. No splitting them up, even if it takes a miracle. He signed it, folded it, and placed it in the locked drawer under the bench, just in case. The envelope came on a Thursday pale cream, official seal embossed on the front, folded neatly in half by hands that had no idea it would land like a blade in Henry's mailbox. He opened it on the porch, beside a chipped mug of cooling coffee and the quiet panting of Rex at his feet. A gentle wind stirred the edge of the paper as he read, and then reread, and then simply held it, as if gripping it tighter might dissolve the words printed there. Ordinance 117. A. The possession of more than 3 canine animals per household is now in direct violation of Pine Hollow Township Safety Code. Compliance required within 90 days of issuance. Non-compliance may result in seizure by animal control. Zeitzure. Henry didn't say the word aloud, didn't even move, but Rex lifted his head, ears flicking back as if the air had thickened with something foul. Luna came around the corner, tail wagging, before pausing halfway up the porch, her instincts reading his stillness like a siren. Inside, Mira sat at the kitchen table with a worn sketch pad, drawing Luna's pause. Her world had narrowed to small, meaningful silences and the soft creaks of this old house. The porch light cast long shadows through the window behind her, as if echoing something just out of reach. Henry exhaled through his nose, folded the letter once, slid it into his coat pocket. He didn't want to disturb her, not yet. Not until he had a plan. That night, the computer's glow became a flickering lighthouse in the dark of the study. The cursor blinked against the pet finder form. He filled out the first profile. Rex, 9. German Shepherd. Retired K. 9. Excellent with children. He uploaded a photo, the one where Mira had leaned her head against his shoulder during a moonlit walk. He hesitated, then selected it anyway. The click of the submit button felt like betrayal. Then came Luna, then Gertie, then Shadow. 14 times he pressed enter. 14 tiny griefs, all carried out silently, while the dogs lay unaware in the next room, breathing slowly in their sleep, dreaming of nothing so cruel as being listed like unwanted furniture. By morning, the rejections began to roll in. Thank you for your inquiry, but we are at capacity. We cannot accept seniors or dogs with behavioral needs at this time. Regretfully, we are not accepting former K9S due to liability policy. Each line a polite no, wrapped in professional indifference. No one wanted them. Not as they were. Not aged. Not broken. Not burdened with stories. By the third day, Henry's inbox looked like a graveyard of unanswered prayers. The dogs could sense it. Training became uneven. Not worse. Just fragile. Gertie, who always spun once before sitting, began sitting without spinning. Bravo, the youngest, forgot the heel command and barked when Mira's sleeve brushed his side. And Rex, the oldest and proudest, began standing guard at the front door at night, as if he too sensed the ticking countdown. Henry tried to keep up appearances, the drills, the feeding schedule, the morning walks, but the spark in his eyes, what little had remained, was flickering now, replaced by something hollowed out. Janet noticed it when she dropped off extra medical gloves and dog biscuits. You look like someone who's trying to hold back a flood with duct tape, she muttered. He didn't deny it, just stared out toward the back gate where Mira sat among her quiet pack Atlas at her side, Luna's head in her lap, and 2 younger dogs flanking her like sentinels. Not one of them made a sound, just breathing together in a strange, sacred rhythm. A circle of voiceless understanding. I can take one, Janet said softly. If it comes to that, Henry didn't respond. Couldn't, because even that kind, offer so rare, so human, felt like another splinter in a ship already taking on water, choosing which child to save from drowning, which soul to sentence to goodbye. That night, after the town had fallen asleep, Henry wandered through the kennels with a flashlight. He stopped at each gate, whispered each name. Rex, you saved me more than once. Luna, you were supposed to retire with me. Gertie, you're the reason Mira smiled that first time. Bravo, you never even had a chance to mess up. He leaned against the wire of the last kennel. Rex pressed his head gently to the mesh on the other side. Henry's voice cracked. I'm running out of time, boy. Rex didn't move, just stayed there, quiet and close. In Mira's room, a folded newspaper clipping from the bulletin board fluttered off the desk. She picked it up in the morning sunlight. Her eyes traced the headline. New animal limits set. Town council tightens restrictions on home canine units. Her fingers crumpled the edge without realizing it. A storm passed across her face, but not of fear. It was something older, something that had waited for a voice to return. She turned toward the window, where Luna waited with her chin resting on the sill. Mira didn't cry. She reached for her sketchpad instead, and on the first blank page, she began drawing a plan. The evening hung thick like wet wool. Inside the house, the smell of old pine cleaner mingled with the faint tinge of Henry's cough syrup. Mira sat in the hallway's shadow, knees drawn up beneath her nightgown, notebook pressed against her chest like a shield. Her grandparents' voices, muffled but tense, seeped through the thin wall of the kitchen. Henry can't keep this up, her grandmother whispered, trying to keep her voice even, but it trembled like dry leaves in wind. He's not sleeping. His chest rattles all night, and the dog's 14, Janet. 14. I know. came the quiet, reluctant answer. The council gave 90 days. If we don't act, they'll seize them. And Mirov, they think the home's unstable. Silence. Mira's fingers clenched the spiral, binding tighter. That silence carried a weight her young mind understood. Not just the dogs. They might take her too. The chair scraped back. Footsteps. The hallway light flicked on for a second, then off again. Mira didn't breathe until the house returned to stillness. She waited, silent as the dogs in their midnight vigil under the oaks, then padded back to her room. At her desk, she clicked on her tiny reading lamp. Its amber glow lit the notebook's blank page. She stared at it, her heart pounding. Then, in sharp, slanted letters across the top, she wrote, "Save them." Below, her hand moved with deliberate strokes. Asterisk. Rex, lead. Luna, flank left. Asterisk Atlas. Watch for cues. Bongo. Delay motion. Tara. Mimic Luna. Asterisk whisper. Tail sweep. Asterisk ace. Eye contact. Solo. Double signal. Bruno. Pace regulator. Juno. Right barrier. Churro. Distractor. Asterisk midge. Signal backup. Asterisk Cole. Front block. Asterisk Milo. Emotional anchor. She chewed the pencil. The list wasn't enough. They needed harmony. A system. No chaos. No barking. No room for failure. She flipped to a new page and began sketching a routine-tight turns, formation shifts, holding positions, circular defense, flank coverage. It looked like a war map, and in some ways, it was. The next morning, Mira didn't speak, but the dogs noticed the change. Out in the backyard, frost crackled underfoot. Henry sat with a thermos and his oxygen cannula, watching from a distance as Mira took the field. She didn't need to speak, just a whistle-soft, single note. Rex sat. Luna dropped to a crouch, eyes sharp. Atlas flanked right. They were reading her. What they didn't understand yet was why they were doing it all together now and at once. Mira bent low, drawing an invisible line across the dirt with her finger. All 14 dogs watched. She pointed to Rex and gestured forward. He moved, one precise loop. Then Luna mirrored it. Then Atlas. Then the others. Bongo lagged. Mira didn't frown, touched her fingers to her chest, then pointed to Bongo again, softer this time. He tried again, nailed it. Janet came outside with a blanket and a puzzled look. She's lining them up? She said under her breath. Henry didn't answer. He simply stared, the thermos forgotten in his hand, as 14 dogs shaped into formation around his granddaughter, like stars pulled by gravity. Every day, Mira refined the routine. She trained them like a conductor arms, moving like waves, chin tilts as punctuation, fingers like instruments. The notebook stayed tucked under her arm, filled now with codes only she could read. She practiced solo routines under the maple canopy, traced patterns into the frost with her bare feet, and used her reflection in the sliding glass door to watch her own movements. They weren't just learning cues, they were learning her. She'd break the routine into chapters: hold, scatter, retract, spin, shield. Each motion had a pulse. Each dog had a beat. By the third week, the routine was nearly seamless. At dusk, neighbors stood at their fences in silence, jaws slack. Mira, silent as ever, would raise one hand and flick her wrist. On cue, Luna darted left, Cole spun right, Midge and Ace crisscrossed. The rest held a silent arc. Not one bark, not one paw out of place. It wasn't just a trick anymore. It was something sacred. That night, Janet tucked Mira into bed. Her hands trembled. "You've been working hard," she whispered, brushing Mira's hair. "I know it's not fair, sweetheart. The town, the rules." Mira looked up at her, eyes dry but burning with something far older than her age. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Janet kissed her forehead, then lingered by the doorway for a long moment before the light clicked off. Mira waited until the house was still. Then she slipped out again, into the cold, into the moonlight. The dogs rose to greet her, their eyes reflecting starlight like shards of mirror. She stood in the middle of the yard and raised both arms like wings. Rex stepped forward, then Luna, then Cole. The others followed. They surrounded her not just in defense or formation, but in loyalty, in something wordless. She opened her notebook, added one final note. Routine 14, shield wall. Then, in smaller letters beneath it, this is not a show. This is the proof. The morning air tasted metallic, dry, still, the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from something holding its breath. Henry laced up his boots with stiff, shaking fingers. The dogs waited as they always did, lined up in loose order like schoolchildren with different memories of discipline. Luna pawed at the ground. Atlas stretched, and Rex sat perfectly still, watching his handler with that quiet, unwavering attention only old dogs knew how to give. "All right, troops," Henry said hoarsely, adjusting his cap. "Just like we practiced." But his voice cracked halfway through, not from emotion but weakness. They jogged only 10 paces before it happened. No dramatic collapse, no cry for help, just a quiet crumple like a sheet folding under its own weight. Henry's body slumped to the gravel path as though someone had cut the strings. Rex was the first to reach him. The German shepherd pressed his nose against Henry's cheek, then let out a low whine that sounded far too much like grief. Janet heard the barking and sprinted from the house, her cardigan flapping like a flag of surrender. "Henry, Henry!" She dropped beside him, brushing gravel from his cheek. His eyes fluttered open, pupils dilated. He tried, but the rest of the sentence never came. Janet didn't wait. She had been expecting this, though she'd never said it aloud. Within minutes, she had Henry loaded into her van, the dogs pacing behind the closed gate, as if trying to follow. The emergency room was cold and indifferent. Machines beeped, walls hummed, and the smell of antiseptic drowned out memory. Henry lay on a gurney under harsh fluorescent light, stripped of uniform, stripped of pride. The young ER doctor, no older than the grandson Henry never had, read through the scans with a frown that aged him 10 years. "Mr. Wyatt," he said gently, eyes scanning the results. "It's stage 3. The cancer spread beyond the lungs." Henry didn't blink. He just stared at the water stain on the ceiling tile, as if it had something more merciful to say. "There's cardiac risk too," the doctor continued. "Based on your EKG and symptoms, you're looking at 6 months, maybe less." Less," Henry repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Good. I hate drawn-out endings." The doctor didn't laugh. Janet offered to drive him home, but Henry shook his head. "I need to walk. For them." She didn't fight it. She knew them didn't mean neighbors or doctors. When he returned to the property, the dogs greeted him like returning royalty. Tails wagged, whimpers of relief echoed. Even Luna nudged his palm with a worried nose. Mira watched from the porch, silent, eyes fixed on her grandfather's every movement. But Henry didn't stop to greet them all. He went straight to the back shed, where the kennel records, training vests, and laminated ID tags were kept. He closed the door behind him. For hours, when he finally came out, the sun was dipping low. The air smelled like fading jasmine and something else, something old and closing. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Henry sat alone in his room with a mug of black coffee and a folder marked Contingency Plan. Inside were notes, addresses, dog profiles, medical records letters he had begun to send to rescues across the country. Most of them came back stamped declined, too old, too many. Behavioral risks, no available capacity. He placed the last rejection letter beside his mug and rubbed his temples until the skin felt raw. 14 dogs. 14 reasons he had woken up every day since the war. Some had scars, some had missing limbs, some had no paperwork because no one had cared to record them. But to Henry, they weren't burdens. They were stories. And he had promised not one of them would die in a cage again. The room was dim. The old lamp on the desk flickered once, like it, too, had something to say but lacked the strength. Henry reached for Rex. The old shepherd had curled up beside his bed, alert as ever, one ear up, the other flicked back in rest. Henry slid to the floor beside him, ribs aching with the movement. Rex lifted his head, then lowered it onto Henry's lap. "I failed them, boy," Henry whispered, the words breaking apart as they came. "I trained soldiers. I fought wars. But this home, this promise, I thought I could hold it all together. Rex didn't move, only blinked slow and deliberate, as if to say, "You haven't failed. You're just tired." "I can't tell, Mira," he added, tears finally rising but refusing to fall. "She's already lost enough, and she's got her own fight to carry. Too much weight for such a small set of shoulders." The silence between them stretched like an old scar visible, healed but never painless. In the yard, Mira stirred in her sleep. Her window was open just enough to catch the low murmur of voices she couldn't make out, the sound of dogs shuffling in the dark, and a grandfather's whisper to the only soul who'd never needed words to understand him. Downstairs, Henry sat on the floor long after the mug went cold, hand resting gently on Rex's fur. "I need more time," he said, but even he didn't believe it. Not anymore. Mira stared blankly at the whiteboard as her teacher explained fractions, but her mind wasn't anywhere near the numbers. It was with the dogs, Luna, Rex, Atlas, Ember, all of them cramped in the kennel back home, ears pressed to metal bars like prisoners, awaiting a verdict. She'd overheard her grandparents again the night before, their voices a cracked whisper through the bedroom wall. "Henry's in no shape to care for them anymore," her grandmother had sighed. "And if the town gets its way, they'll be gone within weeks," her grandfather replied, weary. Mira had written only 2 words in her notebook that night, pressed so hard the pencil nearly snapped. No more. Now, sitting in a row of indifferent students who chewed erasers and doodled half-hearts on worksheets, Mira raised her hand. "Miss Palmer, may I go to the restroom?" The teacher barely glanced up. "Quickly." Mira rose slowly, clutching her backpack tight against her side. She walked down the tiled hallway toward the restroom, but at the last second, ducked into the side stairwell, heart thudding. She bolted down the back stairs, shoved open the door, and felt the sudden slap of cold morning air on her face like a jolt of freedom. Step 1. Get home before they notice. She sprinted, cutting through neighbors' yards and leaping over rusted fences like she was running a relay with lives on the line. Her shoes slapped the pavement. Pine needles caught in her braids, but her breath didn't falter. She knew every shortcut, every gap in the fences, every moment of silence she could steal. The plan was hastily scribbled the night before in the quiet of her room. Asterisk, wait until Henry is distracted. Asterisk, make sure Grandma and Grandpa are out. Asterisk, unlock the kennel. Asterisk, start the routine. Mira crouched behind the garage. Her grandparents' car was gone optometrist appointment. The curtains were still drawn, a good sign. She peeked around the corner and spotted them 4 council members and a man with a clipboard standing on the far end of the yard. Henry was giving them a tour of the property, moving slowly, hand on his cane, his words strained. She could tell by his limp that he was struggling, that each step cost him something, and still he was trying. Showing them the dog run, the water bowls cleaned daily, the safety locks on the gates. They won't see what matters, Mira thought. They won't see the hearts beating behind those bars. She crept along the side of the house, careful to stay out of their sight. When she reached the back patio, she paused, brushed the sweat from her brow and pulled the spare key from her shoelace. The padlock on the kennel clicked open with a soft, metallic sigh. Inside, 14 dogs turned as one. Luna's ears twitched first. Then Rex, alert but still. Atlas stood. Ember gave a soft chuff. None of them barked. None lunged or leapt. They knew. Mira stepped inside, her eyes stinging. "You don't have to wait anymore," she whispered, kneeling on the packed dirt floor. "It's time." She pulled a crumpled piece of notebook paper from her pocket and laid it flat on the ground like it was a map of war. Scribbles marked with arrows, commands, formations, roles. Lunar Retriever Unit, Ember Decoy. Rex your center line, Atlas, flank. She walked the row of dogs slowly, tying colored yarn around each one's collar. Blue for perimeter, red for center line, green for distractions. Her voice was calm, precise like Henry's had once been, like she'd practiced 100 times in the cold mornings when no one was watching. Then she turned toward the clearing near the woods out of sight from the council, out of earshot from her grandfather's labored breaths. She jogged across the grass. The dogs followed in a linnet, not chaotic, not wild, trained, focused. 4 months of quiet repetition, of sunrise drills and flashlights signaling after dark, had shaped them into something more than a pack. They were a team, The clearing opened wide like a hidden stage behind the tree line. "Formation Beta," Mira called softly. The dogs moved like clockwork. Rex and Luna to center. Atlas and Blaze flanking right and left. Ember running figure eights as a living distraction. She blew once on a tin whistle. They halted. Mira stepped into the center, arms out like wings. And then she ran. Not away. Not from anything. She ran into the routine. A leap. A spin. A dive in. Luna, at full speed, retrieved a wooden baton she'd buried earlier. Ember barked once, sharp and on cue, then ducked into the tree line to draw imaginary threat. Rex circled Mira once, like a shield of fur and fire. The others formed a perimeter, silent but unshakable. It wasn't a trick. It was a declaration. This is what they are. This is what you didn't see when you filed your complaint. Not feral, not dangerous, just waiting to be understood. The tour was winding down. Councilwoman Rivers glanced at her watch. "We appreciate your time, Mr. Barrett, but we're still concerned about—" A sharp whistle pierced the air. All heads turned toward the trees. Henry furrowed his brow. "Mira?" Then the first dog appeared, Rex, leading the pack, moving in controlled rhythm. Behind him, Ember, Luna, Atlas, and 11 more. Not running wildly, not snarling. Each in a line, each wearing yarn like medals. And behind them, barefoot, windswept and out of breath, came Mira. She didn't look afraid. She looked like a general. "What in God's name?" one of the councilmen muttered. Henry felt his chest tighten not with pain, but something else. Pride? Fear? Both? Mira stepped forward, her voice steady. "You wanted to know what they can do." She raised her hand, and the dogs as one sat, then laid down, then crossed their paws. Absolute silence. New cows. Just discipline. Henry could barely breathe. But in that stillness, with 14 pairs of eyes locked on his granddaughter, he knew this wasn't rebellion. It was her rescue mission. The wind tugged at Mira's jacket as she stepped out into the backyard. A sharp gust carrying the distant murmur of voices from the front of the House official, tense. Somewhere beyond the hedges, Henry was guiding the town council through the property like a man trying to protect a sinking ship from onlookers already scribbling the headline. But here, in this quiet square of green and cracked flagstone, Mira stood as still as the morning frost, her small hand raised high. One by one, the dogs turned to her. 14 of them, coats bristling, paws shifting against the cold earth. Raya's silver muzzle quivered. Oso's ears twitched. And Rex, the old soldier, stood at the front, shoulders tense but eyes steady on the girl he had long since accepted as pack. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Mira whispered, "Circle." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't repeat herself. She just stood there, trembling but certain, and the pack responded not in chaos, not in confusion, but with a grace born of trust. Like a tide folding inward, the dogs moved. First Rex, then Luna, then the others. Mira turned slowly in place as they closed in, not to threaten, but to form a ring around her, protective, anchored, silent. From the side of the house, footsteps scraped against gravel. Henry's voice strained, trying to keep pace with his pride, and his exhaustion suddenly cracked mid-sentence. "What the hell, Mira?" He rounded the corner just in time to see it. The child. The ring of dogs. The raised hand. The eerie stillness, as if nature itself held its breath. He staggered. One foot caught the edge of the path, his cane swung wide, and then gravity claimed him. He went down hard, a grunt swallowed by the grass. "Henry!" someone shouted. The council members, 3 in total, all gray hair and gray decisions, came rushing around the hedges, expecting danger. What they saw froze them mid-step. 14 dogs, muscled and trained, every one of them focused not on prey, not on fear, but on protection. Their tails weren't raised, no growling, no barking. Just a formation, as ancient as wolf blood guard the vulnerable, surround the heart. And at the center, a girl with her hand still in the air, eyes shining not with defiance, but with something deeper, something that made grown men forget how to speak. Janet burst out the door, having heard Henry's cry. She dropped to his side, checking his pulse with fingers that trembled. He blinked up at her, lungs dragging in uneven air. "They're not attacking," he rasped. "I know," she whispered, but the fear still clung to her like smoke. "They're guarding her." A silence fell, thick and surreal. Even the wind seemed to bow its head. Then a voice Councilwoman Baird, always the first to wield control like a gavel, spoke. "This is what we were afraid of." "No," Janet said sharply, rising to her feet. "This is what you should have hoped for." Baird turned. "Excuse me?" Janet pointed. "That child is in the middle of 14 so-called dangerous animals. And look, not a tooth bared, not a paw raised. Why? Because they trust her. Because she trained them. Because they love her." Henry tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. "They're not weapons. They're not numbers on a permit. They're not liabilities." He looked toward Mira, and for the first time in weeks, his voice didn't shake from illness. It held. "They're hers now." One of the men stepped forward, Councilman Ortega, softer than the others. Eyes always tired, like someone who'd seen more truth than he was allowed to speak. He crouched slightly, meeting Mira's eyes from a distance. "Sweetheart," he said, careful, slow. "Did you tell them to do this?" Mira nodded once. Her notebook, worn, tattered, full of scribbles and routines, was tucked into her jacket. "I didn't want them to be scared," she said softly. "Of the dogs. Or of me." Ortega straightened, took a long breath, then turned to the others. "We came here expecting chaos. I think we found something else entirely." Councilwoman Baird shook her head. "She's a child. She's a handler," Janet said firmly. And the silence that followed felt different now, less like a courtroom, more like a reckoning. Henry slowly pulled himself upright, using Janet's arm. "You wanted to see a reason to let them stay?" He gestured toward the girl in the center. "There she is." The wind shifted again, rustling the trees. The dogs began to lower their stances, not because Mira commanded it, but because the tension had ebbed. They moved as one, drawing a breath the world had been holding, and it was Raya who first broke formation, stepping forward to press her nose against Henry's knee. He chuckled weakly, tears brimming. "Traitor," he murmured to her, voice breaking. Rex gave a small huff, nudging Mira's elbow with his snout. She looked down at him, then out toward the circle that had begun to open like a flower in slow bloom. She dropped her hand. The formation dissolved, not into frenzy, but into belonging. Dogs fanned out to greet the familiar Janet, Henry, even Ortega tails wagging softly, as if to say, "You're part of this now, too." Henry turned to the council, his voice like gravel smoothed by water. "What's the law for, if not to protect what's good?" Baird didn't answer. She just looked at Mira again, this time not with contempt, but with uncertainty. That kind of quiet can be dangerous for a person who's spent too long assuming they already know the answers. As they left one by one, Janet leaned into Henry's shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately, just looked at Mira, still surrounded by the animal she had refused to abandon. "No," he said finally, a faint smile cracking across his worn face. "But for the first time in months, I think they might be." The world stood still. For one suspended moment, the chaos faded, the barking quieted. Even the whispers of the town council froze mid-air like breath and frost. Henry's body was slumped across the brittle grass, one hand still clutching the porch rail, the other curled inward, trembling then still. Mira dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands fluttered uselessly at first, trembling like the dying leaves around them. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Not yet. The circle of dogs didn't move. 14 pairs of eyes fixed on her, on him, tails low, ears alert. They weren't just waiting, they were watching, listening for her. Then it happened. Mira's hand rose. "Zeus," she said. One word. Hoarse. Small. But real. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Janet staggered forward from the gate, but stopped short when she saw the enormous shepherd move on command. Zeus stepped forward from the circle, nostrils flaring, eyes focused. His paws padded toward Henry with eerie calm. At Mira's gesture, he straddled Henry's chest, and with precise training from long ago, began gentle, rhythmic compressions. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Mira's lips quivered. "Luna," she croaked, pointing toward the porch cabinet. "His pills. Top shelf! The snowy shepherd darted away like a silver streak, her body remembering every lesson from the drills Henry used to run, back when his voice was strong and his legs steady. Apollo, Mira whispered. Louder now. She turned to the tan shepherd with a scar over his eye. Med kit, now. Apollo hesitated only a second, then bolted toward the garage. The crowd, for the first time, stepped back, not in fear, in awe. No one moved to stop her. Henry coughed one sweat, sharp. But he didn't stir. Mira leaned down, her small hands reaching to wipe his brow, whispering so low that only the dogs heard. You told me I could do anything, she said, eyes full of something ancient and broken and burning to be healed. You said I wasn't broken, so don't you give up on me now, Henry. And Luna returned first, bounding to Mira's side and dropping the orange bottle into her palm. Mira fumbled with the child-proof cap, her fingers shaking. Then Apollo, carrying the green medkit between his teeth like a soldier returning from battle. Mira tore it open. Gauze, oximeter, EPI pen, spray. She hesitated, then grabbed the nitroglycerin spray and gave 2 quick pumps into Henry's mouth, her training guiding her. Henry's chest rose, shallow and slow. The town council stood like statues. Janet was sobbing, hand over her mouth. The school principal had dropped his phone. Even the CPS agent, so ready with warnings and clipboarded threats, looked utterly undone. But Mira didn't see them. She only saw Henry. His face, sunken and gray. His body, too old for the weight he carried. The dogs, the battle, the fear, her. She pressed her forehead to his and said, clear as sunrise, they're helping. The words cracked something wide open, because it wasn't just that she was speaking. It was that she chose to. For him, the silence she had worn like armor for over a year fell away not in shouts or sobs but in command, in calm, in love. Henry groaned, a flutter in his throat. Then breath. She leaned closer. Stay, Henry. Please, stay. His eyelids twitched. Mira? Her tears fell like summer rain. She laughed at a sound foreign even to her own ears. You're awake. You're okay. Zeus gave a soft, approving bark, then sat beside them, never looking away. Mira turned to the crowd. For the first time, truly, she faced them. My name is Mira Lane, she said, her voice still raw but steady. These dogs aren't dangerous. They're heroes. The silence broke like glass under boot. From somewhere in the back, a man murmured, She hasn't spoken in a year. Someone else whispered, Did you see what they just did? The mayor adjusted his tie, stepping forward slowly. His voice cracked with something not quite guilt, not quite awe. We'll need to call the paramedics. Janet nodded, already pulling out her phone, though her hand trembled. I'm on it. Stay with her, all of you. Mira didn't move. Her hand remained in Henry's and I don't care if it's illegal, she whispered. We're not giving up. I'm not letting anyone take them. Not now. Not ever. The dogs surrounded them again. Not as warriors, but as family. No one stepped closer. No one dared. And for the first time in months, the people who had come to seize, to judge, to dismantle listened. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and something heavier sorrow that had settled in over time. Machines beeped in indifferent rhythm, unaffected by the storm in Mira's chest. She stood silently outside room 216, clutching a folder of photograph creases worn deep from her fingers, tracing them all night. The nurses said he hadn't woken since the heart attack. Stable, but unresponsive. What they didn't know was that 14 hearts had kept his beating. The door opened with a whisper. Afternoon light streamed through the blinds in broken stripes, brushing across Henry's face. His chest rose shallowly. An oxygen tube looped beneath his nose. The man who once tamed chaos with a single whistle now looked impossibly small. Mira moved quietly to his bedside and opened the folder. Zeus midair, jaws wide, wild but noble. Luna curled up on the porch, fox-like and serene. Apollo regal, unmoving, watching. One by one, she placed the photos on the nightstand and around the monitor. framing his world in the faces that had once been his mission. The last picture made her pause. It was older. Henry in uniform, kneeling beside a small dog. Behind them, a ruin of smoke and ash. He looked calm, alive. She set it closest to his heart. A soft knock broke the stillness. Martha stepped in carrying snacks and folded sweaters. "I brought you something," she whispered, as if volume might push Henry further away. Mira didn't respond. She just watched the man who once built a sanctuary from a barn. The one who let her sit for hours on his porch in silence. The one who gave her more safety than any adult since that night on Highway 32. As Martha reached into Henry's old duffel bag to organize his clothes, something tumbled out a weathered leather wallet. Cards spilled. And one photo. "Sorry," Martha said, crouching to gather them, then froze. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the photo, her face draining of color. Recognition. Shock. Guilt. Slowly, she turned it to Mira. It was a photo of Mira's parents. Her mother wore a blue scarf. Her father was laughing, arm looped around her waist. Behind them, Henry, in uniform. Younger, but unmistakably him. Mira leaned forward, drawn in like gravity. Martha whispered, "I thought it was just coincidence. How you took to him, how he always understood. But this," her voice cracked. She turned over the photo, in faded handwriting. "If anything happens, promise me she won't be alone. M. Mira's mother." Martha sat down hard. "Your mom never told me she reached out again. I knew they worked together after the crash, but I didn't know she trusted him this much." The room felt fuller. As if it had finally exhaled, Mira leaned close to the bed. She slid the photo of her parents beside the dogs, brushing Henry's hand. No response, but his eyelids fluttered. "I know now," she whispered. Tears welled, but they didn't sting. They soothed. "These were the kind you let fall." Martha brushed Mira's hair. "He didn't just save you once. He's been saving you every day since." Outside, the sky blushed gold. The trees stirred like lungs drawing breath. Later, the hospital room was still. Machines beeped, steady and slow. The sun dipped low, painting long shadows like watercolors across the floor. Mira sat beside the bed, small fingers curled around Henry's calloused hand, brushing a faded scar. The same hand that once passed her a peanut butter sandwich without questions, without expectation. Janet stood behind her. Martha, her grandfather. Even Dr. Henley lingered near the door. No one spoke. Then Mira did. "I remember." The words didn't burst out. They arrived gently, as if they'd waited until she was strong enough to carry them. "I was in the car," she said. "Everything was red. My legs were pinned. I screamed inside my head, but no one could hear me. Until he said," she looked over her shoulder, meeting her grandparents' eyes for the first time in over a year. He said, "It's okay, little one. I've got you. You're not alone." Gasps. Janet covered her mouth. Martha staggered back, eyes wide. "You crawled into the car," Mira whispered to Henry. "You weren't supposed to be there yet, but you were. You stayed with me until they cut me free." Silence followed, but Mira's voice held steady. "And before the light faded, Mommy said something. She made you promise. She said, 'If I don't make it, watch over her. Her name is Mira. She won't talk, but she listens.'" The name lingered in the air like a bell. Janet dropped to her knees, as if the weight of truth had pulled her down. Her grandfather leaned into the wall, face in his hands. Martha whispered, "Oh my God." All this time, they'd thought Henry had simply wandered into their lives a grieving old man with too many dogs. But he had always been there, from the very beginning. A guardian in the dark. "He could have told us," Janet said through tears. "But he didn't," Mira replied. "Because the promise wasn't to you, it was to her." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her notebook. She flipped to the first page, the one she wrote weeks ago, after hearing her grandparents whisper about taking the dogs away. In bold, careful letters, "Save them." She held it up. "I wasn't just trying to save the dogs, I was trying to save him, too." At the bedside, Henry's hand twitched. Mira didn't flinch. She leaned in, whispered, "You kept your promise. Now it's my turn." Janet sobbed softly. Martha placed a hand over Mira's. For once, no one tried to correct her or explain her. They just listened. Because Mira wasn't pleading anymore. She was bearing witness. And they knew it. She stood slowly. Not as a child seeking permission, but as someone stepping into her truth. I don't care if it was fate, or accident, or a broken truck outside our fence. Henry didn't arrive in our lives. He stayed, because he said he would. At the door, she turned one last time. You asked why I followed him. Why I listened to him. Not you. She smiled, small and steady, because I'd heard his voice before, when I was dying. And it told me to live. The machines kept ticking, steady and soft. But the room had changed. It held history now, a promise fulfilled, and the girl who remembered. Mira sat beside him, her small hand resting lightly on his. The skin beneath her fingers was rough, and calloused hands of a man who'd worked, built, carried weight most others couldn't. Now, that same hand lay still, unmoving. She swallowed hard, holding back the wave that had threatened to rise ever since she entered the room. In her other hand, she held a photo phone she had slipped from her pocket again and again since yesterday. It was the same picture Martha had found in Henry's wallet. Her parents, smiling in the sunlight, Henry in uniform between them. A moment frozen in time, one she could no longer pretend she didn't remember. Mira leaned forward, gently placing the photo on his chest. I remember your voice that night, she whispered, barely louder than the hum of the four. You told my mother you'd watch over me. You held my hand in the dark. You told me it was okay to be afraid. Her voice broke, but she didn't look away. You kept your promise, even when I didn't know it was you. Even when I couldn't speak, you waited. A low groan emerged from the bed. Her head snapped up. Henry's eyelids fluttered. A tremble passed through his fingers. Mira leaned in closer, her heart thudding, afraid it was a trick of the light, but then, the soft rasp of a breath sharper than the rest. His fingers twitched, his lips parted. Mira? She choked on a sob, nodding through tears. I'm here. His eyes opened just barely glassy, unfocused, but he saw her. He saw her. And then, something else bloomed in that moment. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something gentler. They listened to you, he rasped, voice so faint it was almost air. The dogs. They trusted you. Mira gripped his hand. Because you trusted me first. Silence stretched. The machines clicked again. I always hoped, Henry's words caught. His chest rose slowly. You'd find them, not just the dogs, but yourself. Mira nodded, tears falling freely now. You gave me something when I had nothing, she whispered. You didn't see a broken kid. You saw someone worth saving. Henry blinked slowly. You were never broken. A sob shook her chest. She bent down, forehead touching the back of his hand. You kept your promise. Thank you for saving me with them. The words floated in the quiet like the last note of a lullaby. Henry's chest rose and fell once more. Once. Then still. But the machines didn't scream. No alarms blared. He was still with her, faint. But here. The door creaked open behind them. Martha entered, holding a thermos in one hand, her eyes red from nights of too little sleep. Mira didn't turn around. He's awake, she said softly. Martha came forward slowly. Oh, Henry. But Mira gently raised her hand, the same way she had in the yard just days ago. A quiet command, not for dogs but for the silence to hold. Henry's fingers curled faintly in Mira's palm. I told him, Mira said. Everything. Martha stepped back, hand covering her mouth. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say. For a long time, they just sat there. The old man whose life had revolved around a promise he made on a highway shoulder years ago. The girl who had been the promise. And in the stillness between heartbeats, time folded in on itself. The past met the present. The circle closed. Later, when the nurses came in to check his vitals and whisper about how he shouldn't even be conscious, Mira stood. She leaned over one more time and kissed his forehead. Rest now, she whispered. We've got it from here. As she turned to go, the light hit the photo on Henry's chest. Her parents smiling, Henry standing between them. And now, Mira ground, scarred, healing, walking forward, not as someone who had been saved, but someone who could lead. The connection was complete. The community center overflowed. Shoulders touched, knees knocked, but no one complained. The tension that once divided them had shifted into something quieter: expectation, guilt, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, healing had a place here. Councilman Richard Davis looked worn. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew. He gripped the microphone like a lifeline. "Before we begin, I have something to say." His voice trembled. "I was wrong." Silence. No applause. Just breath held tight. "I judged a man with too many dogs, a girl who didn't speak, a home that didn't look like the kind we celebrate. But I never looked close enough." He cleared his throat. "I saw the footage of Mira. The dogs weren't chaos. They were protecting her, loving her." From the front row, Martha stifled a sob. Mira leaned into her side. For the first time, she didn't hide. Davis turned. "Rebecca Simmons, you asked to speak." Rebecca stood, no longer the clipboard crusader she once was. "I judged what I didn't understand," she said. "When my son came home from Afghanistan, he couldn't sleep unless his shepherd was lying on his feet. I forgot that healing doesn't always look tidy. Sometimes it sheds. Sometimes it growls before it trusts. Soft, laughter warm, genuine. I'm rescinding the petition," she continued, "and I'll talk to every person who signed it." Gasps. A few nodded. Some crossed their arms. But most leaned in. Something was shifting. One by one, people stood. An elderly veteran. "Henry trained my daughter's service dog after her crash. Never took a cent. I once called him a hoarder. I didn't know better. A mother. Shadow the Black Shepherd pulled my son from the creek last winter. I never told anyone. I thought no one would believe me. A teenager. Mira helped me during a panic attack. Just sat there with her dog. It worked." Mira's lips curled into the barest smile. Councilman Davis returned to the mic butt, then stepped aside. Janet rose. "This isn't about zoning laws. It's about what healing really looks like." Mira spoke her first words in over a year because one of those dogs learned to give CPR. That's not madness. That's a miracle. She paused. "Henry gave us something rare: unconditional commitment. He saw a broken girl and said, 'You can stand behind the line with me.' He never asked for applause. Maybe now we can finally give him what he never asked for. Respect." A journalist in the back stood. "I want to write a news story. Not about dogs. About lives saved." Applause. Not everyone stood, but enough did to shift something permanent. Later, as the council reconvened, Councilwoman Ramirez leaned toward her mic. "We now move to vote on Addendum B, the Responsible Handler Clause." The room quieted. Councilman Davis rose. "A month ago, I was ready to dismantle something I didn't understand, but I saw a girl walk into the storm and the storm protected her." He turned to Mira. She chose to speak. Not for herself, but for a man, and for these dogs. He read from the proposed clause. In cases where a handler keeps more than 4 dogs, the council may grant exemption if each dog demonstrates behavioral excellence, passes biannual testing, and contributes to community or therapeutic work. Gasps rippled. Councilwoman Ramirez added, "The clause will be named after Officer Henry Lowe, founder of the town's canine unit and a man who believed in second chances." The room erupted. Applause swelled like waves. Councilman Davis raised his hand. "On one condition, Thomas's dogs will undergo biannual testing. The town will fund it through the safety grant. These dogs, Zeus, Luna, Apollo, will be the standard moving forward. Do you accept, Mr. Thomas?" Thomas stood slowly. "Yes, gladly." The gavel fell. Motion passed. Rebecca Simmons rose again. "I want to officially rescind my petition. I thought it was about too many dogs. I see it was always about purpose." She turned to Mira. "And you showed us that." Thomas knelt beside Mira. "They're staying. Because of you." Mira looked up. "Number, because of him." She stepped forward and laid a folded photo on the lectern. Henry, surrounded by 14 shepherds. Mira beside him, her hand on Zeus's head, smiling. The room quieted. No law could speak louder than that image. 14 dogs no longer shadows behind a fence. Now the heart of a town that almost lost them. Councilman Davis folded his hands. This wasn't just a vote. It was a turning point. And in that stillness, a town realigned not by force or law, but by a girl who learned to speak through silence, and the dogs who never needed words. Weeks later, inside the sterile walls of the CPS office, hope sat quietly in the air. Emily Richardson sat between her parents, fingers clenched. On the opposite side, Janet. And Mira hair braided, denim jacket, patched with Luna's paw print, calm and unshaken. Beside her, Henry sat in a wheelchair. Pale, still healing, but alive. In his lap, a thick folder of proof testimonies, letters, videos. The CPS directorial woman with tired eyes entered and flipped open the file. "We've reviewed all medical reports, therapy logs, and witness statements," she began. "What we've seen is remarkable." Emily's breath caught. Mira's recovery surpasses most trauma recovery benchmarks. Her progress is both unprecedented and inspiring. She turned a page. The dogs, once the core concern, have become therapeutic companions. Based on expert recommendations, CPS is prepared to issue a formal waiver. Emily blinked. "A waiver? You'll be allowed structured contact with the dogs. Under ongoing supervision," the director explained. "Your case will be reclassified not as traditional care but as community-supported therapeutic rehabilitation." Tears rolled down Emily's face. Her parents each reached for her shoulders. Mira said nothing, but she reached over, gently pressing her hand into Emily's. The director slid another paper toward Henry. "One last matter legal guardianship." Henry took the pen, voice shaking. "This has been prepared for weeks. If my health declines, I request guardianship of Mira go to Janet Reyes with secondary guardianship to Thomas and Emily Richardson." He cleared his throat. "Because Mira doesn't need more hands pulling her. She needs people who understand her silence. And her dogs, they need her too." The director reviewed the documents. "We'll proceed." Janet's voice cracked. "Henry," he smiled softly. "You saved me once, Janet. You told me, give her time, space, and let the right soul reach her first." He looked at Mira. "I never knew it'd be the dogs." Mira leaned forward. Her voice, gentle but sure, cut through the quiet. "They didn't just help me," she said. "They helped all of us." No one argued. Because it was true. Emily turned to the door. "Can they come in now?" Janet nodded. "They've waited long enough." The door opened. Luna entered first. Then Zeus, Apollo, Rhea. No barking, no chaos, just calm. They didn't storm the room. They belonged in it. The director stood and looked down at the German shepherd nearest her. "That one?" she asked softly. "Is?" "Luna," Emily answered. "She found me when no one else could." Luna sat down and leaned into Mira's knee, eyes steady and deep. The director nodded. "Then I think Luna has earned her title." Emily laughed through tears. "Which is therapy, dog. Unofficial, maybe, but earned." Zeus let out a short, approving huff as if in agreement. Outside, the sun had begun its late descent, casting long gold lines through the slats of the window blinds. Mira reached out, rubbing Apollo's ears, her other hand still in Emily's prop. The future was far from certain, but the rules had changed. Not just the legal ones, the unspoken ones, tooth ones that lived between fear and hope, between silence and voice, between the wildness of instinct and the softness of second chances. And for the first time in too long, everyone in that room understood. This wasn't about saving Mira. It was about letting her save them a lone bark. One step, one soul at a time. The sun dipped low behind the pines as the van pulled into the gravel driveway. Tires crunched softly like the sound of memory arriving. The farmhouse stood as always, a bit crooked, a bit proud, porch creaking like it had something to say. The ramp had been installed that morning. Thomas and Mira built it together. Not perfect, but theirs. When the van door opened, a low whimper drifted across the field. Zeus came first. No bark, just slow, steady steps as if he sensed the fragility of the moment. Luna followed, tail sweeping the grass. Apollo bounded after, momentarily forgetting his training. Thomas helped Henry down the ramp. Thin now, smaller. Henry's uniform jacket lay across his lap like a faded memory. Mira stepped forward. Her voice was calm. "Zeus can do the turn." Left with just a hand signal now. Her voice didn't shake. Henry's hands did. Apollo reached him first. nose to his knee. Luna rested her head on his lap. Zeus waited, then lifted a paw and placed it gently on Henry's foot. "I kept them busy," Mira said softly. Henry's eyes filled, but no words came. Thomas placed a warm hand on his shoulder. "We brought your chair to the porch. Figured you'd want to face west, same as before." It took 10 minutes to reach the porch because every few feet, another dog appeared. From barns, tree-lined nestled sentinels trained by Henry. And they knew he was home. On the porch sat a stack of photos, a training log, and the old tracking collar Henry once used for Zeus's battery, long dead, its meaning very much alive. "You missed Luna catching scent over the creek," Mira said. Henry's voice cracked. "That's hard to do." She smiled, not because he spoke, but because he remembered. Emily brought lemonade. Janet sat silently beside him, placing her hand over his. Mira added, "Everything stayed. The ordnance, CPS, the dogs. You didn't lose anything." Henry turned to her, voice low. "But I almost lost this." "You didn't," Mira whispered. "You kept your promise." The dogs formed a quiet circle, some at his feet, others by the rail. Not loud, not grand, sacred. Henry closed his eyes, letting the breeze wash over him. "I thought, when the ambulance doors closed, I'd never see this again." "But you did," Thomas said. "Because of them. Because of her." Henry looked at Mira. Her eyes no longer avoided his. "I brought you home," she said. A tear slipped down Henry's cheek, landing on Luna's fur. She didn't move. "We have a schedule," Emily offered. "Mira's memorized it. 2 sessions a day." Mira nodded. "Zeus will be your mobility dog again. He remembers everything." Henry looked at the shepherd sitting beside him, waiting, ready, loyal. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. Janet answered, "It's not about deserving. It's about showing up. You showed up for her, now she's showing up for you." As dusk fell, the world didn't need fixing, just breathing. And Henry, for the first time in a long time, felt home. It started with a single hammer strike. On Sycamore Street, the old cedar fence schwants dividing silence and suspicion began to fall. Janet, Thomas, Emily, and Mira worked side by side. Dogs watched nearby. Atlas, Sage, Dakota, Leo, waiting. Board by board, the boundary disappeared. Grass no longer divided. Yards became one. "It was just wood," Mira said. "Now it's space. To move. To share." Leo crossed first. Then Sage. Atlas waited. Mira whispered, "Go." He moved with reverence. Once, this was battlefield. No, it was peace. By sundown, every dog had crossed. So had the people. The next Saturday, laughter filled the yard. Kids came nervous but curious. Flyers Mira made had gone out. Weekend dog wisdom. Meet, greet, learn. Led by Mira and friends. Mira knelt beside each child. Slow breath. Soft hands. They listen better when you let them feel safe. Dakota pressed her forehead into a boy's chest. "She's warm," he whispered. Ava, a girl with cerebral palsy, leaned on Sage like an old friend. Mira blinked back tears. Thomas, quiet but ever present, adjusted water bowls and watched over it all. The program grew. Paperwork, emails, therapy, dog rotations. Janet became the scheduler. Hospitals called, not for shows, but for healing. Sage and Dakota entered the pediatric ward like veterans. A burn-scarred boy whispered stories to Sage. "My dog didn't make it, but this helps." Another day, Leo curled beside a silent hospice patient. She whispered, "Good boy." Mira added drills, cue cards, a chalkboard. Today's lesson, respect over command. Her voice, once fragile, was now full. From the porch, Henry watched, mobility improving. "They're not pets anymore," he said. "They're bridges," Janet replied. "So are you." One Sunday, Mira stood before the kids. Trust doesn't mean tricks. It means if you fall apart, they don't leave. 10 dogs sat behind her, still, watching her like she was gravity. Henry, under the porch shade, held an old handheld camera. He didn't ask Mira to pose. She already was. When her lesson ended, she whispered, "Guardians, disperse." And they did. No leashes. Just silent, purpose-comforting shy kids, curling up beside limps and silence. Henry turned the camera on himself. "If you're watching this," he said, "they're in your hands now. Maybe Mira gave you this. Maybe they found you." He paused, emotion raw. "They're not just dogs. They're a promise, kept across years and pain. They saved me first. Every time I wanted to quit, they reminded me someone still trusted." Behind him, a boy cried quietly. Storm didn't move from his lap. "Mira calls them the guardians now, because they guard more than homes. They guard healing, second chances, the pieces of us we think are lost." He coughed, sipped water. "Keep it going. Train the next group. Listen more than you speak. Look into their eyes. They never lie." He stopped recording. Mira approached, smiling. Not the shy smile of before, one formed by surviving. "You watched?" she asked. "I did," Henry said. "You don't need me out there anymore." "That's not true," she said. "You're the reason I knew how to begin." He smiled, then asked, "Why call them guardians?" "Because they protected more than me. They guarded everything I thought I'd lost. My voice, my memory of safety." Henry's hand found hers. "You know," he said, "I thought the promise I made to your mother would break me." "You kept it," Mira whispered. "And it didn't break you. It built me." From across the yard, Janet called, "Food's ready." Laughter, barking. Life returned where ache once ruled. Henry leaned back, looking at the sky. "They're yours now," he whispered. "Lead them well." Mira didn't answer. She didn't need to. She was already walking toward the next child, and behind her, guardians followed. The air was crisp that morning, the kind of stillness that seemed to ask the world to whisper. A gentle fog clung to the cemetery's edge, like it wasn't ready to let go of the night. The grass was damp beneath the soles of tightly laced shoes. Wind danced through the bare trees, but the clearing itself where Henry Wallace was to be laid to rest remained untouched, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. 14 German shepherds sat in a perfect semicircle around the casket. Not a leash in sight, not a single bark, just silence reverent, deliberate, haunting. They didn't move, didn't tilt their heads. They sat like stone, like they understood. And maybe they did. These weren't just dogs. They were survivors, sentinels, healers. Each of them had once known pain and now carried a purpose, and the man in that casket, he had given it to them. A low whimper broke from the smallest of the dogs, Nova, still barely past her first birthday, before the others gently hushed her with presence alone. Even in grief, they moved as one. The casket was simple, as Henry would have wanted dark oak with brushed metal handles. No flashy eulogies, no floral drama, just the people who mattered. Mira stood at the head of the casket, a folded note clutched tightly in one hand, the other resting against her side. She was taller now, her voice steady, her presence changed. Grief had sculpted something solid in her, something graceful. But even so, her eyes looked softer than they used to like. She'd learned to see the world through his gaze. Janet stood behind her, holding tissues she hadn't used yet. The Richardsons flanked her, their arms around each other. A local pastor said a few words about service, about redemption, about the quiet strength of men who never asked to be thanked. But the most powerful moments didn't come from the words. They came from the silence. When the service ended, Mira stepped forward. Her coat fluttered behind her knees, and her boots crunched against the frostbitten grass. She reached into her pocket and slowly pulled out an old, time-worn photograph. It was creased, edges softened from years of being touched. In the picture, faded but unmistakable, was young Mira with Henry and the dogs. Back when her hair was shorter, her eyes warier, and she still flinched at thunder. Henry was crouched in the middle of the photo, smiling, not the kind of smile you wear for cameras, but the kind that sneaks up on you when you realize you're finally safe. She brushed her thumb across the image one last time, then gently placed the photo on his chest. Her fingers lingered. "I was going to frame it," she whispered, her voice cracking just slightly. "But you always said it belonged right where it started." Her hand trembled. Then she straightened, looked down one last time, and stepped back. And then, As if on cue, the dogs stood. No command, no prompt. They rose as one silent soldier's hand took 2 solemn steps forward. They circled the casket in a slow, steady formation, then returned to their seated positions. It was as though the ceremony hadn't ended, as though Henry still deserved one last watch. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. No one said a word, but tears broke open across faces like tiny avalanches. From behind, the funeral director approached Mira gently. "They're ready when you are," he said quietly. Mira nodded but didn't speak. She turned toward the gathered people. Some were familiar neighbors, volunteers, even 1 or 2 former critics. Others had traveled therapists who'd worked with the dogs, CPS, liaisons, veterans who'd once come to the house just to sit with Henry and not be judged. She stepped up beside the casket again, her voice barely above the wind. "My grandfather didn't change the world with speeches. He changed it 1 dog at a time, 1 person at a time, 1 promise at a time." Her breath hitched. "He once told me, a second chance isn't something you're given, it's something you protect." And he did. Every single day. She glanced at the dogs. They held still waiting, watching. "He taught me that broken things aren't disposable. They're sacred. A beat of silence. And we're going to keep doing what he started, because he didn't rescue us so we could stop." She stepped back, a slow nod to the pastor. The final prayer was brief, but as the words faded into the wind, no one moved. It wasn't until the casket began to lower into the ground that the first tear traced down Mira's cheek. The dogs stood again this time, not in formation. 1 by 1, they approached the edge. Some sat, some lay down. One, Valor, placed his paw on the rim of the grave. Another, Echo, whined softly. No one interrupted. "Let them mourn," someone whispered. "Let them say goodbye in their way." That night, Mira would sit in the small study where Henry used to fall asleep with a book in his lap. The fireplace still flickered there, casting long shadows against the walls, lined with old medals, photos, and chew toys that had somehow become artifacts. On the desk sat a sealed envelope. Her name was scrawled in thick, shaky handwriting. Mira. Inside was a short letter. Only 2 lines. "They trust you now. Keep the promise." She cried for a long time. And then she got up, wiped her face, walked to the backyard, and whistled once. 14 dogs came running not because they had to, because they still believed, because they remembered, because Henry's mission was no longer just his. It belonged to all of them now, and it had only just begun. The sign was simple white oak slats, carved by hand, the letters burned into the grain. The Caldwell Foundation. Beneath it, a smaller line. "In honor of those who never gave up." It swayed gently in the breeze outside what used to be Henry Caldwell's barn. The air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh hay. But the inside was something altogether new. Soft mats lined the training floor. Harnesses and medical kits hung neatly on the walls. There were tiny lockers, each bearing the name of a young handler or pup in training. There was order here, but not sterile order. There was warmth. Mira stood at the center of it all, her palm resting lightly on the head of a young shepherd pup named Leo. His ears were still too big for his body, his legs awkward and floppy, but his eyes had that glint, that spark Henry used to call the look, the one that meant, "I see more than you think I do." Around Mira stood 8 children, ranging from 9 to 16. Some had braces on their arms or legs. Some bore invisible wounds downcast eyes, shoulders curled inward like they were always bracing for something. But they were all holding leashes, and they were all trying. "This isn't obedience," Mira said, her voice firm but soft. "It's a conversation between you and someone who doesn't speak in words but never lies." Janet leaned against the doorway, her eyes glassy. She hadn't expected Mira to grow into this role so fully, so fiercely. Not this fast, not without Henry standing beside her. But there the girl was just barely a teenager carrying his fire forward like it was her own. And maybe it was. Each pup had been chosen carefully. Half were German shepherds, like Titan and June. Others were retrievers, border collies, even one tall-legged mutt named Scout who had the instincts of 100 generations packed into his wiry frame. All of them had passed the temperament test. All of them had been watched, evaluated, matched not for aggression or protection, but for stillness, for the ability to hold space when a human heart trembled. Mira bent down beside one boy, Julian, age 11. He hadn't spoken since the fire that killed his sister. He'd flinched when they first placed the leash in his hand. But now, as the pup sniffed his knee and sat quietly beside him, Julian's fingers gently brushed the fur without hesitation. "That's it," Mira whispered. "Let them find you." In the far corner, the original pack still watched. Titan, now graying at the muzzle, June, Atlas, Ember, the Guardians. They weren't active anymore, not in the way they once had been. But they moved through the building like old teachers, silent, watchful, present. Titan especially seemed to understand the gravity of this transition. Every time Mira spoke, he would settle at her feet like Henry once did. It was almost too much for Janet to bear, some days, but it also gave her strength. Later that afternoon, as the kids ate sandwiches out by the picnic tables and the dogs wrestled in the grass, Janet handed Mira a letter. It had Henry's handwriting on the front. Mira froze. "Where?" "It was tucked inside his training notebook. I didn't open it. It's addressed to you." With trembling hands, Mira slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the paper. It was written in thick, careful lines, the kind of writing he used when he wanted her to slow down and really see. "Mira, if you're reading this, it means you're doing it. You're building the thing we talked about under the porch that night when you thought I was asleep. I heard every word, kiddo. You said you didn't know if you were brave enough. Well, now you do. Don't let them rush you. Don't let them turn this into something cold. Let it stay messy, stay human. Let the dogs be dogs. Let the kids find their own timing. And when in doubt, just go sit in the grass and let Titan lean on you. That always worked for me. Keep the promise. Henry." She didn't cry. Not then. She just folded the letter and placed it against her chest, as if it had always lived there. Then she walked back outside. Evening fell slowly over the property. The sun dipped behind the hills in lazy orange strokes. One by one, the kids began gathering their things, saying goodbyes, loading sleepy pups into the backs of minivans. Julian lingered. He stood beside his father, who kept glancing nervously toward the car. "Do you want to tell her something?" his dad asked softly. Julian nodded. Then, after a long silence, he stepped forward and whispered to Mira, "Can I come back next week?" She knelt beside him. "You can come back every week." And with that, the first day of the Caldwell Foundation came to a close. Later that night, Mira sat alone on the porch, Titan curled at her feet. She stared up at the stars, one hand resting on the thick leather collar Henry used to wear when he worked with the dogs, a kind of talisman now. Janet brought her a blanket, but didn't speak. There was reverence in the quiet. Inside the barn, a small light glowed above the entrance, solar-powered, like Henry always wanted. It lit the sign just enough to make the words shimmer in the darkness. The Caldwell Foundation. Somewhere in the field beyond, a new litter of pups stirred in their sleep. And somewhere even further, if there's such a thing, Henry Caldwell smiled. The morning light filtered through the slatted blinds, casting long golden bars across the worn hardwood floors. In the heart of the room still, lovingly referred to as Henry's room, though a year had passed, sat the old cracked leather chair where he had once spent his days, oxygen tank hissing beside him, dogs curled around his feet like sentinels in repose. Now it was Mira who sat there. Her frame had grown taller, surer. The girl who had once stumbled through silence and trauma was now a young woman, her voice steady, her presence quiet but commanding. In her lap rested a leather-bound journal, Henry's journal pages, worn thin from her reading them over and over, as if by doing so she could coax his voice to speak to her again. At her feet, a pup no more than 5 months old, stirred, stretched, then nestled its snout back against the arch of her foot. It had Henry's eyesore, maybe she only imagined it. Golden brown, alert, unblinking, always watching, always waiting. Outside the window, the training fields of the Caldwell Foundation were coming alive. Children and teenagers moved in steady patterns, following Mira's hand signals. Dogs trotted beside them, focused, eager to please. Therapy, canines in training, guardians in the making. Inside, the quiet hummed with meaning. Mira looked down at the pup whom she had named Promisand, reached to scratch the soft fur between its ears. "You're not just a dog," she whispered. None of them are. And you're not just a promise. You're the one I made. To him. She leaned back in the chair, closed her eyes briefly, and let memory wash over her. Henry's voice in the hallway, rasped but warm. You don't need to speak to lead, but when you do, let it be for them. Henry's hand, placing the old photographer family, his family in her palm the day she gave the eulogy he never wanted. Don't mourn me too long. The world needs you more than I do now. And then, the final video, the one he had recorded when she wasn't looking, left in the vault she only accessed after his death. She'd watched it once. That was all she could bear. His face had been tired, pale, but his eyes held that stubborn light that always made her feel like storms couldn't touch her. If you're watching this, he'd said, then they're in your hands now. Keep the promise, not to Mito them. She hadn't needed instructions. He had trained her not with lessons, but with trust. Promise let out a soft huff and rolled to his side. Mira smiled faintly. You want to run, she murmured. I know. You all do. She rose from the chair with quiet reverence, her hand brushing along the back of it like a silent goodbye, though she never truly left him behind. Then she opened the sliding door to the patio and stepped into the mid-morning air. The field stretched before her, like a canvas dotted with movement, laughter, wagging tails, and concentrated focus. Janet stood on the far end, clipboard in hand, her glasses slipping down her nose as she barked out mock-serious instructions to a teenage boy who was clearly in over his head with an enthusiastic German shepherd twice his size. Mira laughed softly under her breath. She had once been that unsure. Now she trained those who came after. As Mira approached the group, the dogs' heads turned one by one. They always sensed something about her energy, her steadiness. Or maybe it was that she never saw them as tools or trophies, only as hearts. You made it, Janet said, nodding toward her. I wasn't sure if you'd come out today. Mira tilted her head. I promised I would. She bent down to release Promise from the leash, and the pup sprinted ahead, legs still clumsy but spirit wild. The older dogs instinctively made way for him, forming an impromptu circle of acceptance. Mira watched, her chest swelling with something she couldn't name. Something that didn't need a name. A young girl no older than Mira had been when she arrived at Henry's approached with cautious steps, a leash coiled nervously in her hand. Miss Mira? She asked. Do you think I could be like you someday? You know, help the ones like them? Mira crouched down so they were eye to eye. Her hand rested lightly on the girl's shoulder. You already are, she said gently. You just don't know it yet. The girl beamed, not a wide smile, but something deeper a shift in her bones, a little loosening of fear, just like Mira had once felt when Henry first believed in her. As the girl walked off to join her group, Mira turned to watch the wide-open field again. Dogs and children moving as one, wounds meeting purpose, scars becoming maps. She looked up at the sky, cloudless and kind today, and though no voice answered, she spoke aloud anyway. He promised to watch over me, she said quietly. Now it's my turn to watch over the ones who can't speak, but never stopped listening. Behind her, the old screen door creaked gently in the wind. The house stood unchanged. Henry's chair waited by the window. The portrait hung over the mantel, the one Mira had drawn herself. Henry, surrounded by his dogs, with Mira standing beside him, her hand resting on the shoulder of a child who had yet to arrive. The foundation would grow. The pups would become protectors. And Mira? Mira had become the keeper of the promise. And that would never change. When we open our lives to animals, we discover a kind of loyalty that outlasts storms and spans generations. A German shepherd's steady gaze, a gentle paw on Anethi's are quiet reminders that love can walk on four legs and still speak straight to the heart. Henry's story, Mira's healing, and the steadfast circle of guardians all point to the same truth. When humans and dogs meet in trust, both come away stronger, braver, more whole. If today's tale stirred something in you, there's a short guide I've tucked in the description, a collection of simple exercises and reflections that help me deepen the bond with my own aging shepherd. No pressure, of course. Think of it as a well-worn trail map left on the porch for a fellow traveler. Give it a look when you're ready. Pour a cup of coffee and let your dog rest their head in your lap while you read. You might find a new way to say, I'm here. And I'm listening.